Hello, everybody, and welcome to the AWS Community Summit Online. My name is Phil Horn. I am one of the organizers of this and the host today. People around me that have been involved in putting this together. I've got Joe to my right, just over there, and we've got Dave in the studio down near Milton Keynes. So we are the team that are putting this on today. We've got quite a busy schedule. We are here from 2 o'clock till 5 o'clock. We've got 4 sections. We're going to be looking at architecture. We're going to be looking at security, machine learning, and then we're going to be moving into a final roundtable on serverless before we go into our quiz at the end of the day. So before I move into our first roundtable, I've got a few things that I need to do. First of all, I'm going to tell you how it's going to work. So rather than have the talks as part of the day today, we've made them all available in advance. And we're going to show you a little video on how to access those talks via the website. So Dave, if you could just play that very quick video there. Okay, right. So pretty self-evident there. You go to the ComSum website, go to the talks, and then you'll be able to see all 13 abstracts and talks that are going to be talked about today. They are going to be there for all time, like all of the previous CSO talks that we've ever had, either the live or the online events. They're all there on YouTube, a fantastic resource of AWS-related content from some brilliant speakers. So that's how that's working. We're going to move into our Q&A with our speakers fairly shortly. Before that, a very important thing for me to do in this section is to thank our fantastic sponsors. And they are StackRox, Bridge Crew, Infinity Works, PA Consulting, Elastic, and Steamhouse. We have all of those sponsors, or pretty much all of them, are going to be with us through the whole of 2021 and all of the CSO events that we're going to be doing through this year. So a brilliant partnership that we've got with those guys, and enormously welcome. 3 of those sponsors have got competitions for us that all of you can enter. Very shortly, Dave's going to show us a video for what StackRox are raffling off today. And Joe is also going to put into the Twitch chat the links for the Bridge Crew and the Steamhouse competitions. So Joe, if you can put those in, and Dave, if you can play that StackRox video now, that would be awesome.
Game Watch, Game Watch, Game Watch, Game Watch. It's them Game Watch,どこでも Game Watch, 誰でも Game Watch, Game Watch. ジャッジ、ボール、バーミン、ファイヤー、マイクロコンピューターを使ったゲームウォッチ。ゲームをしないときはデジタル式クォーツ時計です。ゲームウォッチ。
Why buy just a video game from Atari or Intellivision? Invest in the wonder computer of the 1980s for under $300. Unlike games, it has a real computer keyboard. The whole family can learn computing at home. Plays great games, too. Under $300, the wonder computer of the 1980s.
Coming soon. Gorf, the Wonder arcade game, and Omega Race in home versions.
Okay, so I hope that made sense to some of you. We've got Steve Giguera from StackRox shortly, who's going to be able to tell us more about what it is that StackRox are prize drawing later in one of the sessions. And the video is courtesy of Joe Park, who thought that would be a fantastic thing to do. What else do I need to tell you at this point? So we've got our Twitter information is going to come up as a little bottom third very shortly. Dave's going to play that. information about how to join our Slack channel is also going to come up at the bottom of the screen for you about now. And then just a little reminder, actually, about where to see and how to access those talks is also going to come up along the bottom. Okay, I think that is me covering everything that I need to cover for now. And we are going to go straight into our architecture roundtable, where I'm going to meet Bruno and Jonty. Play that video, please, Dave. Okay. Hello, Jonty. Hello, Bruno. How are you doing?
Hi there.
Hi, everyone. I'm doing great.
Excellent. Excellent. Right. I'm going to start this off by asking you both to do a quick introduction to yourselves, and then we'll move into a bit of a chat after that. Jonty,
Cool.
go first, please.
Yeah, so my name's Jonty Bale. I'm principal architect at a company called Cinch Cars, based in Manchester at the moment. So I've been with the business only a few months, but it's been a really interesting time. So I've got a history of probably, I don't know, sort of 10 years using AWS since about 2009. So I've been involved in the sort of the ecosystem and things that have been going on for quite a while.
Cool. Yeah, and obviously you've been quite involved in the Manchester AWS user group for a good long time, probably about 10 years, I think.
Yeah, it's 5 of us sat in a coffee shop, I think, when we first started.
That's absolutely right. It really was, which is about 10, 11 years ago, something like that. Bruno, welcome back. Not long ago since we were sat here for the CSO reInvent coverage. Do us a quick introduction to yourself, please.
Yeah, it feels like family, right?
It
So,
should.
hey, my name is Bruno. I'm the head of technology and architecture at Fortum, an energy company, one of the biggest ones in Europe. I'm based in Helsinki, Finland, and I've been a regular at this amazing community for a while. I'm fairly new in my current role. Been there for 2-3 months. I've been working in consulting for quite a bit in different industries, which I still do as an advisor and architect. I've been helping a lot of different teams throughout the years, working with things like cloud, DevOps, data engineering, and IoT, and security. I've been working with AWS for the past 9+ years, and with Azure and Google Cloud for the past 2.5.
Yeah, brilliant.
Happy to be.
And I think that, this is, you've done 3, maybe 4 talks for Community Summit things, is that right?
Sounds about right.
We've had you back quite a lot. You're always a very popular speaker, so thank you. Right, we're going to start with by playing the abstract actually for your talk, Bruno. So Dave, if I can ask you to just play that abstract to remind all of the people viewing what it is that Bruno's talk is on, and then we're going to go into a bit of Q&A around that talk. So Dave, can you play that video, please?
Hi everyone, my name is Bruno Almeida and I work as Head of Technology and Architecture at Fortum. And I regularly advise and help organizations in areas such as cloud, data and security. Having worked with AWS for the past 9 years in different industries, projects and teams, I have designed, reviewed and developed multiple AWS-based solutions. So in the upcoming AWS Community Summit Online, I'm going to give a talk about what are the most typical pitfalls and challenges in terms of security, governance, and architecture that I regularly face while developing AWS-based solutions and how you can overcome them. So don't miss my talk, 7 AWS Deadly Sins, in the next Community Summit Online. Thank you and hope to see you there.
Okay, good stuff. Actually, before I dive into you, Jonty, to ask you questions of Bruno, I'd like to, we've added Rob and Jamie into this roundtable. So Rob, can you start with a quick introduction to yourself?
I sure can. Hi. Yeah, so I'm Rob. I'm CTO and co-founder of a AWS advanced consulting partner in Manchester called Steamhouse. I'm also a AWS ambassador.
Awesome. Thank you. Jamie?
Hi, yeah, my name is Jamie Walker. I also work at Steamhouse. I've been at Steamhouse for about 3.5, 4 years now. Work as a solutions architect.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Okay, so back to you then, Jonty, please. Fire some questions at Bruno.
Yeah.
In the meantime, we'll keep looking at Twitch and seeing if any of the audience are asking questions there as well. But over to you, Jonty.
Thanks, Phil. It was a really interesting talk, Bruno, in terms of like some really good, sensible sort of baseline stuff that you should be doing and thinking about with your Amazon accounts. One thing would be really interesting in terms of some of the stuff we talk about in terms of securing an account and what you need to do to give that account love. I can't remember which sin was it on your list. Number one. There we go. We've run into some problems with that in terms of it's quite interesting in terms of the changes to being fully remote has placed some constraints and challenges around managing things like MFA on root accounts and how do you provision that? And have you got any thoughts around managing and provisioning AWS account infrastructure in kind of a remote first world?
Wow, I was not expecting that question. That's a nice question. I think actually some of the things if I look now kind of touching a bit to your talk, because you were already, let's say that you are not a sinner because you were actually kind of an anti-pattern, like you are doing a lot of things right from the get-go. And one of the things is using of course the AWS control tower and the landing zones, which allows you to package that kind of baseline configuration for all the accounts. I think I haven't thought about if it's easier or harder in the remote world aspect. That's a great question. I'm not sure if there's. I would like to understand a bit what's your struggles with it.
It's interesting in terms of like best practice from Amazon recommends you use like physical MFA, or you have MFA if you're not using, say, a password manager for MFA at an enterprise level or an organization level. It's really challenging to manage root access to those accounts because you're locked to a single thing. It's something we're struggling with at the moment. I was just wondering if you guys have got a nice solution to it, or it's use a password manager.
Yeah, well, I think that there's password managers and there's password managers. I think that's the first thing. So some of them are a bit more tailored to share that root account password in a very restrictive way, of course, with a few people, because let's face it, it is a shared password.
Yeah, it's not that so much as it's a shared password. It's like if someone on call needs to be able to get access to it, although it should be very infrequent, it's just an interesting challenge. But no.
Yeah, that's also I think it's more like how you segregate and compartmentalize the roles. Like I will say that if you are in an on-call, very rarely, or I will say never, you should be able to actually need the root account. You should have maybe an IAM role that allows you to do that. So most of the
it's like 6 things you have to do with a root account, isn't it? So I'm being a bit flippant, but it was just kind of an interesting thing. We keep running into these challenges.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge actually when it comes to provision accounts is that there's a lot of things that you cannot yet do through automation. I think that's kind of one area that likely AWS will improve. Like you cannot really provision a full account and destroy it fully in a fully automated way. There's always something.
I think someone has put an open source project together with Twilio and various other things that does it, but it's just not going there.
Yeah, but it's also the type of things that you don't need to do so often. Depending on the size of your organization, of course.
Yeah, it's and how do you feel about kind of the? It's interesting in terms of the stuff to do with the stuff that's now coming out of the organization's account service team versus control tower service team, and there's a bit of overlap. And in terms of where would you go in terms of your thinking, what should people's first point of call should be? Should it be, control tower? Should it be organizations? Should it be? What would you recommend as getting started?
Well, I think that's a fair question, and we are kind of used to having AWS services that overlap each other. That's kind of it happens. I think that organizations is kind of the most straightforward or first touch point, because it's when companies are looking to get consolidated billing, right? When you start having multiple accounts, you don't want to have 10 different invoices, you want to have one. So the organizations, it's a very kind of straightforward way to have that. Also, of course, you have the service control policies that you could explore there. But I think Control Tower is kind of like maybe one step higher than that, in the sense that allows you to implement the guardrails, implement you actually streamlining the creation of the baseline account, what should be there. So I will say that if you're not familiar with either of the services, I think that organizations is easier to start and understand, because there's a very kind of simple way to onboard and get the consolidated billing.
It kind of
But
just
I will
works.
say that but I would say that they kind of complement each other, and you end up you should use both in the end. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'll go with one more, which is quite interesting. It's something I've run into a lot with engineers in terms of when you look at things like secrets management. I think this was number, is it 5 or 6? In terms of encryption and secret management. We talk about Secrets Manager and sort of parameter store, and 9 times out of 10, when you work with developers, they go, I'm going to store my secret in Secrets Manager because it's called Secrets Manager, without necessarily really understanding what the advantages and disadvantages are of the two different methods. I know you kind of discussed that a bit, but in terms of, if you were working on an application moving forward, when would you use each of those services?
Yeah, speaking of services that kind of overlap each other, that's one of the perfect and classic examples. So, just to bring everyone up to speed on that. So, SSM parameter store allows you to store any kind of parameters, including non-sensitive data. So you can store something in plain text and just have your application retrieve it. Where it comes with the secrets is that you have one type of parameter called a secure string, which is you can have KMS encrypted it, which allows you to have this secrets management. Now, when it comes to AWS Secrets Manager, that's something that is specifically designed just for secrets. You are not going to use that to put non-sensitive data. One of the characteristics of Secrets Manager is that it has it's called like rotation capability. So imagining if you have like an RDS, the classic example is that you have an RDS database that has a root account to the database. You need to store that password somewhere. If you store it in Secrets Manager, you can enable automatic rotation, meaning that when your applications are retrieving the password from Secrets Manager, that you can enable Secrets Manager to automatically rotate that password. It goes to RDS and change it every, let's say, month, every X amount of time, and your applications don't really care because they are always going to retrieve when they start. Now, of course, this works beautiful for RDS, but if you want to do it any other services, you can, but you need to implement it via Lambda yourself. So you can say like, yes, I have this password that belongs to my specific service, and I want you to, I want Secrets Manager to update it. So I need to enable that and create a specific Lambda that just does that.
So it's fair to say if you're looking for something that has credential rotation, probably towards Secrets Manager, either as an AWS managed solution or as something you can build yourself with Lambda. But if you're just looking to sort of store, parameters, API keys, sensitive information that has much less sort of rate of change, probably parameter store might be the best option.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to kind of draw the line. But of course, we know, you can use both services, and nothing prevents that. But yeah, it can be a bit confusing when you're not familiar with either or, and especially the impact of them.
That's a couple of questions I had. I don't know if we got anything from Twitch.
Yeah, so I was just going to add to the parameter store versus secret topic. So I think there are also some service limits and stuff that I think people get caught out with fairly often on parameter store. So there are different tiering types that parameter store gives you that have sort of different throughput levels, and there's also kind of a higher performance setting that parameter store also gives you. So I think those are dependent on the kind of throughput and stuff that you're looking for, and also sort of cost as well. Those are kind of other things, I guess, to sort of bear in mind. Sometimes putting stuff in parameter store, even if it is using an encrypted type, is actually cheaper if you're querying it infrequently, versus using the sort of secret manager stuff. So just something to bear in mind.
Yep, that's a really good addition.
Okay, yeah. So Rob, Jamie, any questions from you, or do you want to pick up? I know there's one from PSMO in the Twitch chat. So what do you want to go?
So I think the sort of main question for me, I mean, obviously, I think that it's aimed at sort of both talks, really. So both talks are kind of aimed at almost greenfield applications that that you're sort of building out from scratch on AWS. I think that the other kind of direction that obviously lots of companies are going into now is taking a on-prem monolithic application and kind of breaking that out into microservices. And kind of moving that into AWS. So I'd kind of be interested to see what what both guys' opinions are in terms of where to sort of start with those kinds of projects.
Oh,
I don't know who wants to pick that up first, Bruno.
I can go first. So actually, my talk is not really aimed at greenfield, and I think that might be a bit of misconception here, in the sense that those things are the things that I usually see, or I try to introduce from the get-go when I'm designing, of course, a greenfield application. But I see a lot of this SIDS being committed, especially when I'm getting involved in the middle of a project, because it's not, when a development team is looking at as building the system, these are not the things that they will think from the get-go, right? These are the things that they don't really care at first. Like, what comes, they request an AWS account in the organization and someone will give them, and they assume it's secure because someone provided me, or like things like encryption maybe might be like a byproduct in that sense. Like, will I care that if I'm doing a POC, something to demo to in a few months or something, in a few weeks? So those are the things that I wanted to kind of highlight also in the talk, is that when you have knowledge of AWS and you get involved kind of a bit in the middle, there are this kind of things that I usually see, and kind of one of the aims for the talk was actually also to call attention, like, hey, even if you are developing something that you are using Lambda API gateway and something, but there's a whole part of the account of the solution that usually does not appear in architecture diagrams. And that's the thing, because you are talking about the value versus what's the baseline is, and focusing also a bit on the baseline and the governance is super important, because that's kind of the challenge that we see when it comes to security, right?
Yeah, no, I think it's true. It's kind of having that good foundation is really relevant, in terms of a lot of people forget about it, or a lot of it's sometimes when you get project teams who are doing these kind of deliveries into a new cloud environment, they just focus on meeting their deliverables rather than dealing with all the kind of the fabric, as it were, that needs to exist based on that business's requirements. So yes, assuming we've got some of that in place in terms of strategies for then looking at how you move applications into, say, public cloud, a classic answer of it depends, but assuming you're moving a sort of if it's you're replatforming a web application from sort of an on-prem data center into the cloud, and you want to start moving towards building new features with, say, a higher level capability of services in Amazon rather than just doing it all yourself. There's a number of different ways to do it. One of the things we found is really useful in terms of when you're looking at moving services and looking at, can we add new functionality or do new things using cloud native ways of working, be it serverless, containers, anything else, moving to microservices, is actually focusing on the business domain. So in terms of understanding about the capabilities of the business name and the users of those services, and that helps you understand about where the seams are within the application. And you can think about, well, we want to focus specifically on one area of the application, which might be we want to improve, or one area, and starting to break that out and using different types of strangler patterns to implement that. Obviously it depends on the application and the interfaces into that, about the approach you might take with building out an AWS to sort of get access to some of those higher level services. But there is a million ways to do it, literally. But I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. Like I said, just sort of looking at I guess the differences in terms of a completely sort of greenfield application where you're building something from scratch. Generally those conversations now are using all of the latest AWS sort of serverless services and kind of going down that route. But there are still a lot of projects where it's taking an existing application, probably migrating it as is, and then, like you say, sort of picking sort of, I guess, business functions within that application, starting to sort of break those out into sort of individual, microservices or whatever, kind of using those latest and greatest serverless features. So I think the security stuff, like you say, that putting those sort of guardrails and that framework in place in general kind of applies, whether it's, like you say, whether it's a greenfield account or whether it's, something that's kind of a bit more legacy.
I think something I've seen a few times, which is a bit of a gotcha when people about replatforming or moving applications, is they sometimes can tend to forget about the network layer. And in terms of you actually kind of need to really pay attention to what you're doing with your VPCs and your NAT gateways and where you're putting things. And it can sort of catch you out sometimes, depending on how you're approaching the problem and what you're doing. And it's something that's definitely worth, people need to think about that layer of capabilities, not just from sort of pure governance and compliance at an account level. Think about all those layers that sit beneath the workload are really important.
Yeah, I think, like very often what I see and happening more and more is that there's actually a lack of knowledge in the cloud foundations when it comes to AWS, meaning that especially like there's a big push, of course, serverless, and I really love serverless, but you still need to take care about security, like encryption in transit, encryption at rest. Those will not change. Same with the shared responsibility model. A lot of people using AWS today do not understand the shared responsibility model, which is kind of one of the cornerstones for how to use cloud, no matter if it's AWS or other. So those are the kind of things that I really recommend people to kind of, understand that baseline, understand the root foundations of what you are going to build. When it comes to, especially transition applications that, maybe from on-prem and you are trying to refactor or replatform to AWS, I think it's very easy to forget, to focus on moving A to B and maybe A, maybe shuffle it, put it in B. But if you don't, you can do that without doing encryption. You can do that without doing infrastructure as code. You will go a lot faster in deliver one application. The second, third, fourth will be the same speed. And the thing is that if you need, it's a build approach. You need to build on those bricks. You need to build those foundations. So if you do infrastructure as code from the start, it will take you a little bit longer than if you don't. But that second application will be so much easier. That third application even more. It's the same with encryption. If you start building those foundations, and if you really understand what you are building, it actually helps to create speed and momentum across. And I think that's the thing that I think that both engineers and business leaders need to understand when we're talking about cloud and building things in cloud.
Perfect. And that is a brilliant segue into Jonty's talk. So Dave, I'm going to ask you now to play the abstract video for Jonty's talk.
Hello there, my name's Jonty Bale. I'm a principal architect at Cinch. I'm going to be speaking at the upcoming AWS ComSum event around Cinch's journey to AWS. So first off, what is Cinch? Cinch is a faff-free online service which puts a consumer in the driving seat and helps them buy and own a vehicle. That's basically what we do. We're trying to remove all of the pain to do with purchasing a car, owning a car, all those kind of things. So our service only launched in October this year. It's been a little bit of a while in the making, but we started off in a very small way about this time last year. We had 2 small engineering squads, and since we've grown to about 11. Our tech stack has changed quite a lot, and we'll be talking about that in detail as part of this talk. We started off mostly building traditional containerized applications using C#, and we moved over time to go all in on AWS and adopt serverless TypeScript. So the talk will talk about that. It will talk about some of the architectural patterns and anti-patterns we saw in terms of scaling and building our application. And we're really covering all the details about what worked, what hasn't, where are some of the gotchas we've faced. I really look forward to sharing all this information with you guys on March the 4th. So I'll speak to you then. All the best.
Okay, good stuff. Right, thank you very much, Jonty. So who would like to kick off with a question for Jonty then?
I can go.
Good stuff. Thank you, Bruno.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your talk, by the way. I think that I mentioned earlier, like it's kind of like you are not the sinner in that sense that you guys did. I was very impressed because there's a lot of things packed there a lot of things to catch up during the talk, that a lot of things that are often things that teams forget to do when you are designing it from scratch. You went all in, which is quite refreshing. I was actually wondering, because one thing that you mentioned is that that the team, you selected actually the vendor, which was AWS, and then you start building, and the team itself did not have much experience. And I wonder, like, how did you manage to do everything right, or a lot of things right from the get-go, when a team does not have so much experience?
We didn't dig too deeply into our application architecture. We've still got a lot of technical debt, but we're getting through it. So what's quite interesting in terms of, I joined the business after the transition, but I can tell the tale of how we got there. So what was really interesting, we're actually using a different cloud provider at the time, and we made the decision we want to move from containers to serverless. And we kind of did a big sort of checking, making sure, doing our homework, checking the different vendors. And the conclusion was, AWS is the right option, because just the people, the talent, the ecosystem, everything else around it seemed the strongest placement for where we wanted to go and what we wanted to do. So what was really interesting is we work in a team, we're very focused on outcomes as an organization, less about, time and materials and everything else. It's about us delivering the customer outcomes and also the outcomes for the business. So, we were lucky enough that we could give the engineers some weeks of time to get together, work as a sort of a mob. We had, I think it's like 6 or 7 tech leads working together over a period of a couple of weeks to say, look, what's the right technology option for us? What do we feel comfortable building in? What we can do? And we got that kind of groundswell of support from our engineering community to, they selected, we're going to do it in serverless framework. We definitely want to use TypeScript, because what's interesting is, although we were using C# primarily on the back end, we were using React and TypeScript on the front end already. So the transition to use TypeScript everywhere felt quite natural for everyone. So it wasn't like we were going from sort of, Perl to use, Rust or something else like that, or making a radical change. It was kind of, it felt quite natural for a lot of the engineers. I will say we're still dealing with a lot of the kind of fallout from people writing C# style backend services using TypeScript. Not, they work, which is awesome, and the team's done a great job, but change is harder in some places than it should be.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
That makes sense, but at the same time, let's just kind of follow up of that. I think it's kind of, from a cultural perspective, is quite remarkable, and I think that's, don't sell yourself short, because you change cloud provider, you change the programming language with an existing engineering team, and getting that buy-in, I think it's super important. And I think just understanding, like, what was the thought process from the engineers, I think it's really interesting.
I think it was basically logical decisions from engineers, also from our our CTO and director of engineering, were like they trusted the engineering team to make the decision, and they got behind it and supported it. I'll be honest, a CTO said to us at the meeting the other day, was like, he was incredibly uncomfortable about the choice, but it felt was the right time. But now on the other side of it, he would do it 100 times again. Our cost base has come down dramatically in terms of for hosting and operations. The scalability is just, we just don't worry about it anymore. I've given up worrying about servers, which is wonderful. But I think it was a really challenging decision at the time, and we felt the engineering team thought it was the right decision, and that was ultimately, they got backed on that, and I think that's the right way to do it.
Jamie, I don't know if you're checking the questions in Twitch that are coming in.
I can't see them at the moment, Phil, but I do have one of my own, if that's okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so great talk, Jonty. So it's just around the guardrails part of the talk. Now you standardize on TypeScript. How do you manage building out those guardrails and that kind of foundation baseline? Do you use infrastructure as code?
So
more specifically CDK.
So we use infrastructures everywhere. It's one of the interesting things when we sort of started this journey previous summer, last summer, well, this summer. Time has lost its all meaning at the moment. We looked at CDK, and I think the engineers felt it wasn't quite ready, and it was kind of, the build process was like 2 build processes then to get the packages around and ship the code. People went, I just want something that's easy for engineers, so that's why we chose serverless. CDK has changed a bit now, and I think a few other engineering teams have gone, like, we really want to use CDK now, so they've started using CDK, which is great. For our actual infrastructure as code, we've got quite a lot of pure CloudFormation. We're not using Terraform because we're all in. We operate this kind of virtual platform squad that's responsible for some of the guardrails and tooling. They have their own separate code repos independent of that, and we use GitHub Actions, and we do all deployments into the relevant environments. Some stuff at sort of the higher privilege level is deployed manually, but that stuff changes very, very infrequently. But it's still from CloudFormation templates.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, the question actually in Twitch was about CDK. How much have you got started with it, and any thoughts or opinions on it yet?
So we've kind of I've not used it. I have to confess, I've not had the chance to get my hands on the tooling and really get dirty with it. But I know we've stood up a couple of additional engineering squads in the last month or so, and they've said we're CDK only. We're not going back to serverless framework. So we've now got a number of production services that are running using CDK tooling, and they like, yep, we're happy with it. And I think we're probably going to see a shift in the engineering community we've got to start using CDK. You know, a lot of our teams have moved to write all their serverless YAML in TypeScript already for serverless framework, and CDK feels like the next more developer friendly step of that. So rather than dealing with large maps of data and it's just objects, which completely makes sense for engineers, makes it a lot more readable as well.
Cool, sure. Okay, Rob, do you want to pick up? There's a couple more questions coming into Twitch now, which is good.
I do, but it's just got very loud in here, so I would. I'd maybe suggest someone else picks it up for a minute whilst until a meltdown in the background ends.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Bruno, are you looking at the Twitch questions, or Jamie, can you see them yet, or do you want me to pipe in?
You can pipe in, Phil. I'm just.
All right. Yeah. No. Fair enough. So, serverless framework-wise, have you thought or looked at AWS SAM? If so, any comparisons with serverless framework?
Yeah, so I think SAM was looked at when we looked at it with sort of CDK and that tooling around it, and I think it was merely we selected it purely based on sort of developer experience, and the builds felt simpler, the deployment felt simpler. It was much easier for engineers to get up and running with it. As I said, that was the primary concern. The engineer said, we like this one. We did a number of proof of concepts with each of the different tool sets to sort of get to the bottom of what people enjoyed working with, and serverless was the one that was chosen. But I think, yeah, we're starting to see a bit more kind of framework proliferation in the org at the moment.
Yeah. Okay, and then another one in from NJT1000. I'm struggling with my letters.
Okay.
Around this one's more of a cultural question, so I will summarize. Did you find any issues with people wanting to do things the way they've always done them and potentially scared for change? It's a big challenge.
No,
isn't it?
Is the honest answer.
Okay.
If you had someone, if you asked an engineer, like, would you like to build applications in a serverless way where you get to be in charge of everything, you can control your own tests and build ephemeral environments? Most engineers will go yes. So that's the view from us, is that from an engineering perspective, absolutely happy. One thing I will say, we're a very engineering-led organization. So because we're a greenfield organization, we have a small security team. We don't have a large amount of other challenges or investment in fixed assets that sort of maybe mandate different ways of working. We don't have any operations teams, so it's just down to our engineering squads. So it was very much like, people were quite happy not to be running Kubernetes clusters.
I would like to pitch in on that. I think that don't sell itself short, because I don't think it's just about it's business as usual. No, I think that type of culture is fostered. I mean, it doesn't happen by chance, and I think it's important that we address that, because when you want to do dramatic changes like that in a short period of time, there is a natural tendency from some companies, especially like corporations, to make it like a decision from top level, like we're going to change cloud provider, we're going to change that, and of course that never works, because there's always a resistance to that. What needs to happen is that he goes with the role of architecture. The role of an architect is not to make a technology decision. The role of an architect is to facilitate the technology decisions. So there needs to be, of course, that consensus coming from the engineering, like evaluating different options and selecting based on that, and of course taking the business considerations into account. But I think that's super critical, and I think if you don't have, that's a culture that doesn't happen by chance. It needs to be fostered.
It's a conscious choice. I think I spend a lot of my time nowadays, rather than doing I do some technical work, but it's mostly around things like conscious organizational design. What decisions are we making in terms of how we structure what we're doing that is going to have a direct impact on our technical architecture and the way we make decisions? A couple of ones is conscious decisions around organizational structure and how you build the org. The other one is about trust. The question is, you see some organizations don't actually trust your engineers, and they introduce you can introduce a whole bunch of additional controls and processes and ways of working that might make you feel comfortable but don't actually result in that much of a benefit for the organization. So, if anyone's worked in an organization with a cab, that's a change advisory board, where you take your code changes and go, hello, please cab, can I release my changes this week, please? And they go, no, we've got these other things to go away. That actually doesn't help the business achieve the outcomes it needs to. You have to trust your engineers that we say, you guys want to deploy something to production? Yeah, just go ahead, but just let us know that's happened. That's what we ask for. We have a release notes channel where teams can put what they've released, and we don't get them to ask for approval. They just go and do it. But yeah, it can feel really uncomfortable if you've not done it before, but you just have to trust your engineering teams to do the right thing.
Yeah, I fully agree. I would like to kind of soft change the topic for one thing that kind of caught my eye in your talk, and that you actually just mentioned. You mentioned that you don't have operations team, and that you have, each squad is focused on delivery. And you mentioned that when it comes to the cost breakdown, 50% or so is governance and management things. And I'm wondering, how do you see that? Is that does that mean that is, you mentioned that, okay, it's okay because the cost is still small, and I fully understand that. But how does that come to be in terms of when you have different teams focused? How do you do the governance? How do you kind of create that alignment that translate in a way in those operational costs?
Yeah, so I think it's cost visibility and cost management is interesting. So for us, in terms of the way we're running at the moment, the cost of our Amazon accounts isn't a significant thing compared to the rest of the org and what it's doing. So primetime TV is probably more expensive than, some TV adverts more expensive than our AWS bill for 6 months. So for us, it's about enabling that agility. But what I will say is one thing we do, we didn't have this initially. We got it in place fairly soon after launch, is a really comprehensive tagging strategy. So in terms of, we get stuff tagged at an organizational unit level, in terms of sort of like our engineering tribes, the engineering functions, also at a squad level. We have a whole sort of prescriptive set of tags around that. So we use those as cost allocation codes in terms of Cost Explorer and the way that stuff gets rolled up in the billing. So we get visibility of costs at a squad level. I think, let me just play this back to you in terms of, you're kind of asking in terms of how do we factor in things like our governance costs and everything else as part of our model of the organization. Is that correct? Or is it more just a...
I think it's just how you factor it, how, if you have different teams, for instance, how do you oversee in a way the things like CloudTrail and the costs of CloudTrail, or the costs of CloudWatch for the logging, and how do you govern the costs essentially across those?
Yeah, I think it's has to be a material issue for us to worry about it too much. I think so. We monitor it to see if it becomes a significant problem. Something we are looking at doing at the moment is introducing talked about Amazon accounts. They're effectively very easy to create, and so we are probably looking at adopting a sort of a more structured account strategy where we have more accounts that may be more localized at a business unit or a squad level. Obviously, a production and a non-production account for those teams, and that would give us better visibility of it. But it's a difficult one, really. It's a large percentage of our costs, but it's not something that we're too worried about at the moment.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question. Time has flown on this one. So any of the three of you want to ask Jonty anything else, or indeed any questions from across the four of you?
So I did have a follow-up question on the, I guess, sort of cost optimization and the governance stuff. So one of the things you sort of talked about is introducing a sort of dedicated teams for cost optimization, security, governance, tooling, etc. How would you kind of see that sort of sitting alongside the sort of squad, the squads that you've got currently, and sort of managing those, sort of priorities and people pulling in different directions and stuff?
So it's interesting to talk about the shared responsibility model you get in AWS. So probably what we're looking at doing is having a squad that will occupy sort of some of the segments between AWS and the application space. So, most of our teams are doing serverless. Some teams are talking about wanting to run some containers, are doing a few other bits and bobs. So I'd probably expect that team to provide services sort of as a platform. So they'd probably own account vending machine, the guardrails that go with that. They'd probably own the VPCs and the networking. But it'd be kind of like they wouldn't sort of touch into the space the application teams would be working in, but it would be just like, we know we've got this stuff there that exists. What you find is most of our application teams, are fairly self-contained. They manage their own CI/CD pipelines into production. They manage their own production environments. I think probably the route we're going to go is we'll probably break it down into AWS accounts per team, with 2 accounts per team, and we'll provide guardrails into that. And then we know we've got a fairly sensible blast radius if anything happens. The teams are able to sort of self-manage and do what they want to do. And then the kind of the fabric services that are providing that governance wrap and security wrap are kind of invisible. If that makes sense, Rob?
Yeah, definitely.
I think that I think that the approach is very sensible, and I think that's also like how I've been working in with different companies, including Fortum, is having that kind of. I think it described it in a nice way. I never thought about describing it in a nice way of the shared responsibility model. I think it's that. I think one thing that is just tends to happen, especially in the corporate world, like very big and clunky structures, is that a lot of teams tend to see those type of teams as kind of the ops team, and like a team that they issue tickets to do the things that they don't want, and type of trying to delegate and push part of their ownership there. And instead, I think that and that needs to be a clear message from the executive level that this team is a team that provides guidance. We are not here to solve your ops problems. We are here to guide you through your ops problems. So we are kind of a school of pilots rather than we are the pilots of the airplane. And I think that that's a bit, it's kind of a balance and needs to be very, very balanced. And
it sort of comes down to a kind of a sort of form of a platform approach, in terms of if you're looking at, if anyone's read sort of Team Topologies, which is a book on sort of organizational design and how you build platform teams and the kind of way they interact with other teams, we kind of take that as a kind of a steer in terms of some of the stuff we are doing. So it's really useful. There's an interesting Amazon white paper on this. There's automating governance on AWS, I think. It's quite an old white paper. It sort of predates Control Tower, but it deals with a lot of this and talks about their view of kind of managed cloud service providers that sit sort of in the middle of the shared responsibility model. But it's kind of it's an interesting read, that one.
Good. I'm going to draw it to a close at that point. Very nice, chaps. Thank you very much. Really good job. And I think that's gone down well with everybody. So you're both in the, well, all 4 of you are in the Slack channel. So I'm sure if people have got further questions for you, you're both on your talks, be happy to pick those up. We had better move on. And I'm going to have to ask you all to leave the session so that we can invite Laura from AWS into. I know. We'll have you back sometime very soon. So thanks again. Rob, I think you're joining us for the next round table, aren't you? I don't know if you are as well, Jamie, but whoever is joining us for the next round table, put yourself in the waiting room. If you other guys can leave, and then we'll have Laura come in.
Thanks all.
Cheers.
Bye, guys.
See you later.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, and Joe's going to work his magic now, and it's hardly magic, but you know what I mean. Okay, and this might now be moving to Dave, who is going to bring Laura into shot.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, Laura. We can hear you. I can't see you yet. I don't know whether that means you haven't turned your camera on. There you go. Yes.
I've got to do a few clicks just to get through on Zoom. Sorry, we're timed by default. So hoping you can all see me now. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh no, not a problem. Not a problem. I just immediately assumed it was our fault rather than yours. So, right, Laura, welcome. Let me do a very quick. So this section is. We are big fans at the Community Summit of the Restart program. And we obviously met sometime towards the end of last year. I'm not going to try and explain who you are and what you do. I'm going to ask you to tell us all about the Restart program. Laura.
Thank you so much. You'd probably do a better job than I, so no judgment if you wanted to do that for me. So nice to meet everybody. I'm Laura Addison. I lead the AWS Restart program. I'm here at AWS for UK and Ireland. let's start with what is Restart. So I'm conscious we've only got a short time, but I'm fortunate enough to lead the program. Restart is a CSR program for AWS, and we look to support underrepresented people land careers in tech and provide the reskilling opportunity to be able to do that. The program is incredibly inclusive and incredibly diverse. We look to create builders of the future, regardless of academic background or work history so far. So really creating an environment for people to reskill. How do we do that? We immerse everybody into a 12-week reskill opportunity, completely free for those that want to join us. Starts with IT fundamentals and dives deep into the AWS cloud, and then culminates in cloud practitioner. And we pepper through AWS volunteering and employability skills all the way through that. The vision and the mission for us is to help more people in more locations land those careers in tech. And we really encourage any employer who are looking to, I suppose, bring in junior talent in a different way to engage with the programme locally. We've got cohorts running currently in London, in Manchester, in Birmingham, in Bristol. I know location feels a bit fluid at the moment with everything happening virtually, but if you've got an opportunity to bring in sort of future builders into your organisation, then Restart is designed to provide, you know, a real workforce development programme where talent sort of exists within. Like I said, I'm conscious of everyone's time, but I'd welcome any feedback on what you'd like to understand more around. The programme is scaling at pace, and yeah, I'd love to answer any questions that you've got, any specifics you want to dive deep onto in the short time we've got now.
Yeah, and that's fantastic. We'll give people a chance to pop some questions into the Twitch chat. As you were speaking, we had a couple of bottom thirds pop up for you. First of all, we were calling you Ricardo Suarez, unfortunately, but we then got the correct bottom.
That's much more exotic than Laura Addison, so I've been called worse. That's fine.
So we put the link up for the Restart program that appeared there. Joe, I think, will also be able to put it into the Twitch chat and into Slack. And from a personal perspective, at Steamhouse, we've had 5 graduates from the Restart program, and they are fantastic. You know, in terms of a kind of case study reference or whatever, you know, I'm sure my colleagues at Steamhouse would be very happy to sort of say, you know, it's a big thumbs up to the program and the people that we've had out of it. I think, you know, we may not get questions in right now, but if we get any coming into Slack, and in fact, I think we'll probably add you into the Slack group so that if questions come up, they can go directly to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
That'd be okay.
And to echo what you've just said, I think that's really powerful. You know, we look at it from a learner perspective. You know, people land in those careers, but the employer voice is just as important to the program. We want to hear, you know, from an employer perspective, the sorts of talented people you've been able to find as part of the program. And yeah, as I said, we've got graduates, you know, who are in the region in the Northwest now. So if anybody wants to interact with the program, if you're going to add me into the Slack, that might be the best way to reach out. But it's a conversation that can start now, not one that you need to sort of wait for.
Yeah, definitely. Yep, I think that's the thing, isn't it? Oh yeah, there's other people in the Twitch chat now, sort of knowing about the program and saying how strongly they recommend it, etc. So, what was the point I was going to make then? It's gone. But that was it. Just, you know, there's a lot of demand for talent within this industry, and I think what the Restart program is doing is identifying that early talent and then giving them the first start, so that then when they you know, move into their jobs, they are well prepared to actually continue that journey as cloud engineers. So
absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. The digital skills gap isn't getting any smaller, especially not with COVID. So I think, yeah, you know, AWS take it really seriously. It's a CSR program for us who want to create that diverse pool of talent that can go on and be, like I said, wonderful builders of the future.
Yeah. Good stuff. Laura, thank you very much for joining us. I know you had we had a small window of your time today. So thank you. And in our future community summit events that we'll be doing through the rest of the year, we'll be bringing in graduates from the program. We'll be bringing in employers who've had experience as well to just try and keep the momentum going on this. So thank you very much. And
amazing. Yeah, no, look forward to taking any questions as well. Thanks for including me. Really nice to see everyone.
Good stuff. Thanks a lot.
Take care. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Okay, Dave, have you followed me around? Because what I'm going to do now actually is something that I meant to do at the start, which is to find out a little bit about our audience. And what I would like people to do is to, we just, very often it's a kind of just a group of people on the other end of Twitch. And I think it would be useful for us so that we get to shape the events and the sorts of things that we do through the rest of the year to sort of things that you're looking for. So I think, first of all, if you could just type into Twitch where you are. So, however you want to answer that, geographically would be ideal. So UK, Manchester, outside of the UK, just if you could very quickly just sort of type into Twitch your answer to that. And I'll give you a quick second or two to do that. Okay, excellent. A few of those answers coming in now. The second question, as I'm letting you just finish that, I'm talking slowly and filling. Is this your first time at a community summit event, as in one of the AWS community summit or ComSum events that we've done? We've done a few physical ones, we've done some online ones. So if you perhaps just sort of say first time or been to every one, or whichever it is that is your thing. Then just two more. What's your particular area of interest? So today, obviously, we've got roundtables on architecture, serverless, security, machine learning. Is there an area of interest that you've got outside of that? IoT or containers or, or everything? The answer could be just anything and everything AWS. So just finding out your area of interest within this whole AWS ecosystem. And then the final question I've got for you is just to try and understand the sort of range of expertise that we have within the community watching today. And again, I don't know how you answer this. We could go 0 to 5, where 0 is practically no experience whatsoever. 5 is you've got loads of certs, you're very experienced, and a range of 0 to 5, I think, is probably the most useful way for us to gauge that. Good. Thank you for that. I know Joe's been kind of taking some screenshots of the answers that are coming in. So that would be good for us to have a look at afterwards. And then what we will do after this event is send a survey to everybody who signed up for this to answer similar sorts of questions, just so we can start to build up a better picture of who the audience is, and we can adapt what we're doing to that. Right, next up, we are a little behind time, so I better speed up. We're going to move into our security roundtables. So Dave, if you could play that intro, that'd be great. Okay, so the people that we should have now in the session are Matt Johnson, Steve Giguera, Andrew Larson, and Jonat. And I can now see you all, and you are there. Hello, gentlemen. How are you doing?
Hey. Very good, thanks.
Excellent.
Top notch.
Thank you very much for joining us. I am going to go around the room and just ask you to quickly give an introduction to yourself. Steve, you first, please.
Oh. Yeah. All right. Hi there. My name's Steve Giguera. I am a director of solution architecture and community building at StackRox. I have a history in Kubernetes security, container security, but going all the way back throughout the pipeline and static analysis tools, like just about anything in this space in terms of securing applications going into the cloud.
Awesome. Thank you. Gareth, up next, please. Hello, Gareth. I'll try Matt. Can you hear me, Matt?
Loud and clear. And Steve, I really need to sort my microphone out so it like appears under my monitor. It looks way better. Yeah, Matt Johnson. I am a developer advocate for Bridge Crew, now formerly Palo Alto.
Yes, of course. Big change. Big change. Excellent. We'll come back to you on that. Ionut.
Hi, I'm Ionuț Crăciunescu, Head of Platform Engineering at World Wizards, a fintech based in Leamington Spa, UK that automates financial advice.
Good stuff. Thank you. And then I'm going to try Gareth one more time. Gareth, can you hear me now? Gareth, give me some indication you can hear me. I mean, I'm guessing you can't. Can you hear me?
Sorry, Gareth? I thought we were looking for Andrew.
Andrew.
I don't answer to Gareth.
The problem? Glad I could help.
Thank you, Steve. Do you want a job? Andrew, my brain's melted already, and I'm only just part way through this session.
That's
Andrew,
all right.
Over to you. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Andrew Larson. I am the AWS technical lead at PA Consulting. I'm also an AWS partner architect, and I've been working on AWS for about 10 years now.
Fabulous. And I know you well, Andrew. You've spoken at previous ComSom events. Wow. Anyway, we'll move on very quickly from that. What we're going to do first is play Steve Jagera's abstract for his talk, and then we'll go into some Q&A.
Hey there, AWS enthusiasts, Kubernetes security lovers, and people who just like cloud. My name's Steve Jagera. I am the Director of Solution Architecture and Community for EMEA at StackRox. StackRox is a Kubernetes native security solution that helps leverage declarative data and built-in controls for richer security context, native enforcement, and continuous hardening. That last one sounds a little dodgy, but I'm going to own it. What will I be doing at AWS Community Summit? Well, could be juggling. Whoa. Maybe I'll play a song. Maybe not. Perhaps a reading of DevSecops by Glenn Wilson. Or maybe I'll just show you all my cool Star Trek crap. Or more likely, I'll be doing a talk called Layer Cake. What do I mean by layer cake? Oh, I'm glad you asked. Cloud and Kubernetes has been a game changer in many ways. We all know this. At the very least, it has brought us the ability and established an expectation of desired state as code. Very cool. This has given birth to GitOps. Amazing. We're moving slowly towards that nirvana of everything as code. But how does that apply to security? Well, in the past, security's noble but often poorly defined and received attempts at hanging with the cool kids with forced parlance like DevSecops and shift left. This change that has enabled the Daft Punk infused better, faster, stronger of DevOps can also be used to bring a secure definition of harder. Security used to be more about probability. Just watch and see and hope for the best. With this desired state as code, we can have security's desired state as code as well. With each layer and each stage we add through our pipeline from Terraform to YAML, with the help of Kubernetes and cloud, we can not only define what secure is, but even maintain it. Join me.
Okay, good stuff. Very entertaining, Steve. Lovely job. Some very cool Star Trek kit that you have there. We're going to move very quickly to Matt. I believe you have your first question for Steve.
Yeah, great talk, Steve. I thought that between, maybe a bit of a spoiler here, but between kind of your talk covering the, which security tools where throughout all of those layers, and Andrew's kind of overview of, well, how do I get myself a pipeline to build those layers in the first place? Those kind of two talks perfectly complemented each other. I agree with you on the value of context and how, a lot of the tools kind of do one thing well, and, it's something we need to focus on. With all of the kind of tools and options in each space, do you really think a opinionated approach to kind of doing all of the things necessary to create that context is actually kind of possible, or would it just get split up anyway because of people choosing different tools from each section? Or does there maybe need to be a new language used to kind of, move that, almost like a set of standardized APIs to kind of move that context between tools so that you don't have to pick a set block of them to wire together?
Yeah, it's funny. I was alluding, because I obviously, I don't know how well shameless plugs are received here, but there are commercial solutions that draw that line, so that take earlier scan information and bring them forward and use that again when you start talking about looking at declarative definitions of what we're about to deploy. So that does exist. I try to avoid talking about that because it makes me look biased.
I might know a couple of those myself.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's really important. I think it's one of the things that differentiates when you make the step up from using open source solutions, that you realize this can actually be something that benefits you. And that was what I was alluding to. I would really welcome, and I think I said this recently, an open source solution, unless you know of one, and I would love to know if you know one, that because your talk's about Chekhov, and I mentioned Chekhov in my talk. I just didn't show it because I figured you would.
No worries at all.
And if that could do something like tying back, for example, looking at, I'm going to use this in terms of Chekhov, in terms of inspecting Kubernetes declarative definitions, right, as opposed to Terraform in this case. Sure. But if it could parse the tree a little bit more and look at, well, this calls this, well, this calls this, and this calls this, to the point where if you reach the point where you're looking at an image, declarative definition of the image and tag that will be used, it could run a scan on the spot so that you had the context of the vulnerabilities in its declarative state. I would love to see that. And I think that would greatly reduce the vulnerability management burden. That as people move to cloud, they're still living in this world of vulnerabilities go to a part of your organization, and we're missing the actual, just to use context in a different sense, we're missing the understanding that everything's ephemeral, and the lifespan of a vulnerability or its context is short. So having a vulnerability management department is almost, I'm going to probably get in trouble for saying this, is approaching dinosaurs. So I think we need to start looking at things like that. I was trying to call out that it doesn't really exist well yet.
Yeah, that's I appreciate your thoughts there. We just think, in another shameless plug, but of an open source nature, we're actually working on some updates to Chekhov to enable kind of graph-based queries. Very much in that idea of context. So a single resource or security parameters or checking attached to a single resource. So does this object have, a version? Does this object have these security policies applied? Is this object running as root? Is all well and good. But if you can create a graph of interconnected nodes of a dependency tree of, to your point, the image that object is using, the cluster that object is going to get deployed on, even down into, well, okay, this Kubernetes cluster is actually deployed by this Terraform because it's an AKS cluster. You can then start creating some really interesting rules which actually catch more things than just, taking each piece of data as, non-contextualized. So we're kind of looking forward to do that. And that's going to be in a public roadmap coming over the next couple of weeks. But yeah, it's not quite the whole beautifully baked cake yet, to your point.
Yeah, the talk that talk was originally designed to be rejected by KubeCon because it did. The idea was it was just I took all of the security tools I could see that were part of the CNCF world, and then all the ones I just knew about that weren't necessarily on their radar, and then went through to try and show that there is still that gap that you just mentioned of when we look at point solutions for security. It's great because we can do that, but sometimes we create more more problems than we solve by using some of these open source solutions. And bringing things together can, I think it can, in a line of what you were just saying, in the whatever that Nirvana solution, is going to make a huge
on
difference.
An interconnected graph or context or whatever you
I can
call
visualize
it.
It looks beautiful.
Right. Well, hopefully I'll see you at Cloud Native Rejects then in that case, because I also had a talk rejected. So happy days.
Yeah, right. See you there.
Okay. Right, good. I want to keep the flow of this going a little bit, but I would also like to bring in Andrew or Jonat for any question that they might have for Steve, or if not, then we can move to the abstract for Andrew. Do either of you have a question for Steve? No. Moving on then. David, can you please play for me Andrew Larson's abstract?
Hi, I'm Andrew Larson, and I will be speaking at the upcoming AWS ConSum about DevSecOps, how to build and run a secure service on AWS. I am the AWS Technical Lead at PA Consulting, an AWS Premier Partner. I'm also an AWS Partner Network Ambassador. I have over 10 years' experience building solutions on AWS. At PA, I have worked on greenfield projects as well as large-scale cloud migrations in both the public and private sector. I've also helped customers adopt DevSecOps ways of working. So what is DevSecOps? To me, it is three things. First, it is a cultural change. It is having a single team responsible for the running and building of modern web applications. It is about removing traditional barriers between developers, operations, and security team members. Second, it is using tools and processes to automate security compliance and shift left security in the software lifecycle. And thirdly, it is having a robust monitoring in place for the long-term operation of applications. In this talk, I will cover what changes you can make to make DevSecOps successful in your organization. I will cover DevSecOps tools on AWS, including their strengths and weaknesses, and third-party tools that can be used to complement them. This will include serverless, containers, and instance-based compute. I look forward to talking to you all on March the 4th.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Andrew. I'm going to go to Jonat. Do you have a question for Andrew there?
Yeah, sure. Great talk, Andrew. I really like all the context you put together about various security aspects people should look at and really consider. What started my interest, one of the things, is about using an ELK stack, and it's something that we are discussing internally at World Wizards as well, whether we should use it to centralize all our security or logging events coming from AWS or CloudWatch. Can you tell us a bit about the experience about using that, operations and costs?
So I think first with cost, mainly I found that quite often just the open source ELK stuff has most of the functionality you need. So for a lot of projects, I know a lot of people get away with sort of a zero cost solution. But one of the things that I think is really great about using ELK is CloudWatch. When you've got different things logging, you've got all your different log streams, and it's very hard to see sort of events that are connected. So by putting everything in ELK, you can actually order things by time, so you can very quickly follow like a transaction through the pipeline through your different components. So I find it just much easier to see what's going on. So if you've got server events, the actual Nginx logs and your application logs, and you want to look at a time period, you can look at all those different logs from different sources all in one place. And I just don't feel that CloudWatch quite gives you that.
It's kind of the feeling that I personally have at the moment when I have to do a search in CloudWatch is not as quick as when I have to do it using Elk Stack. And while Cloud Insight made a lot of good progress, I still have to collect or select a single CloudWatch stream as opposed to querying a massive index in Elasticsearch. But there's a bit of difference between these two products. And while I like the search capabilities I have in Elk Stack, I like the managed service in CloudWatch quite a lot. And I was debating, should I put everything? I already have container logs in there. I have some metrics, but we are on a process of moving towards serverless architectures. And I have things like Lambda logs or some Lambda metrics. Do I want all of those in my Elk Stack? And CloudFront logs or API gateway logs?
I mean, I've been following the approach of pretty much putting everything possible in Elk, and it just then gives you that flexibility to search it, and it's very easy. I think that the queries you can do using Elk are just much more powerful. So it's very easy to exclude data that you don't want to see. But if you haven't got it there in the first place and you do need to look at it for any reason, you just then lose that visibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Good stuff. Steve, Matt, either of you have a question?
Just thoughts from the horror stories and all that. Andrew, on the Elk point, any kind of tips, or how would you manage? That's yet another thing to manage, yet another kind of cost to have when there's already kind of built-in log management. Where do you kind of sit on that?
So one of the things that I've been working on a lot recently is a couple of projects where they're for relatively secure clients, and as a result of that, we haven't been able to use a lot of the SaaS products that that I would ideally like to use. So I think we've accepted there is a certain organizational overhead, and one of the dangers is, if any production data, in the event of an error, production data can possibly leak into your logs, and they don't want that data ever sort of like leaving our area of control. So I think as a result, we've sort of accepted that there is a certain amount of running cost. With things like Elk in particular, I found that it can be quite easy if you're running it on top of something like Kubernetes, and it lets you deploy the different components independently much easier. It's very easy to sort of set it up for sort of zero downtime deployments, and there are Helm charts out there which will actually do a lot of the work for you. I think, as was said in some of the discussion earlier, though, you really do have to sometimes watch some of these Helm charts and make sure that they are actually fit for purpose and not causing all sorts of extra issues.
What was it Steve said? Defaults can be dangerous. Yeah, so true.
Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Good. Couple of questions in Twitch for you. So Elasticsearch on EC2 or Elasticsearch Service?
Generally, I've ended up using Elasticsearch on EC2 rather than the Elasticsearch Service. Pretty much because I think if you're just deploying all of Elk, it sort of makes sense. And also, I think I haven't had a little look at the Elasticsearch Service for a while, but quite often it did lag a little bit behind the latest version.
Okay, and then second quick one before we move into, I think, the abstract for Matt's talk. In your Elk stack, do you use Logstash, FileBeats, or something else?
So for most things, we're using FileBeats, and the current project I'm working on is a mixture of, it's probably 90% Linux, 10% Windows. So we're using a mixture of FileBeats and WinBeats for the Windows logging.
Yeah, cool. Good. Okay, Dave, can we move swiftly into Matt's abstract, please?
Hi, my name is Matt Johnson, and I'm a developer advocate with Bridgecrew. Bridgecrew's mission is to enable infrastructure security where code happens, making it super easy to automate and remediate issues right from your first line of Terraform, CloudFormation, Kubernetes, etc. To that end, my topic for Community Summit is automating security in your infrastructure with open source. We're going to go through a number of practical, automatable open source tools which will allow you to embed automated security for your infrastructure as code right into your CI/CD pipeline, with a main view of looking at productivity and looking at having that virtual security advocate working behind the scenes across all of your deploys, all of your infrastructure as code configurations, really just to try and provide a benefit and a speed up to your teams, and potentially to provide, that drop-in security for teams that maybe don't have a full-time security advocate. We have things covering drift detection with IAM. We have the ability to take IAM configurations and turn them into infrastructure as code. We have automations that will check for common issues with S3 or leaking secrets or, exposing AWS or other cloud resources to the public unnecessarily. And we'll kind of show some examples of how other teams have tied those into their pipelines, look at some of the challenges these open source tools have been used to solve. Looking forward to it and hope to see you there.
Great stuff. Thank you, Matt. So who has a question for Matt? Other than what happened with the acquisition and how's that going?
All right.
No, move on from that. A more interesting question then, Steve. Yeah, go
on. Policy as code. So there's different standards out there now for policy as code. Rigo kind of is taking the lead at the moment. Yep. Chekhov are using Python essentially. I just don't. How are you experiencing adoption with security people engaging with using code to create policy? Because I'm not sure how many security people feel comfortable in that kind of space.
Yeah, sure. Really good question. One that is, always a topic of discussion. Python was kind of chosen because traditional security teams were more comfortable with Python than pretty much anything else. All the kind of tools they were writing to go and investigate and realize, network security issues, for example, was generally kind of written in Python, we found. So it was kind of a very familiar language. Also, the idea of kind of having to set up something kind of net new to then start writing policies in a new domain specific language when all you want to do is quickly check that you have no public S3 buckets and things like that. It didn't feel like the right fit. There's day-long courses, not to hate on OPA, but there's courses specifically around OPA, copying and pasting an existing check in Python and going, okay, yeah, I can see what that's doing. It's 4 lines. I can probably, hack my way through a new check. Just seemed like an easier kind of path. And we thought that, the quicker time to hello world would kind of enable more value for more people. That said, if there are then 1 million Rigo policies open source to be reused, what then becomes more usable than something that, isn't in a common framework? It's interesting. But then again, you've also got kind of the Azure policy set. You've got, the policy definitions used by AWS that were kind of touched on in the securing S3 topic. So yeah, I think we're gonna fight that battle for quite a while. Don't know if you have any other insights on which you prefer outside of inside and outside of the kind of Kubernetes ecosystem.
Oh, you replied with a question. Nice. I it's funny because coming from devs to securing almost an ops world, I'm totally comfortable with Python or Rigo. I don't really mind. I find that in my experience, I am faced with people who have the accountability and the responsibility for securing these things, but would feel uncomfortable with learning an entirely new language. And this is why I found it interesting, because Python's been around so long, most people can read it at the very least and understand how to make even the small changes or a cut and paste change to modify a new thing. So that this is why I was wondering. I think there is, either way, I like that there's policy as code, and I hope it gets adopted. I kind of don't care who wins the war. I just think it's a good way of doing things. So I'm just going to wait and see. I'm going to teleport 2 years into the future to see what happens.
I 100% agree. As long as it's in a code format that we can change, control, track, version, it's, it doesn't really matter what the format is for most of the people using it. What I will say, one thing on Chekhov, another design decision for bad or for better, is all the policies are baked into the code base. So there's no, where do I get my policies from? If you download the Chekhov code base, you can, like you say, go in and read each one of those policies and kind of see how you'd feel about hacking another one together for your own goals.
Cool. I have one more question, but I'm conscious that there might be other ones, so I'll pause.
Okay, so if there's one from Andrew or Yonut for Matt, then nope. Oh, Andrew.
Oh, yeah. I've got a question for you, Matt. So, I was going to say, how would you find the Chekhov compares and contrasts with something like TFSec if you're doing a lot of Terraform? Because it doesn't seem to be as well known, but it does seem to be a lot more comprehensive, I would say.
Yeah, so very similar in the fact that, none of them just do one framework anymore. Chekhov tries to do Kubernetes, CloudFormation, Terraform, et cetera. There is, no reason, if you really wanted to, you couldn't run all of them in your pipelines at the end of the day. Like, we have this wonderful scenario of pipelines being fairly easy and sensible. But I think realistically, they all offer slight nuances. And like everything with open source, kind of do your research, use the best one for you, which one has the most policies that fit your needs. If one of them has, for example, a load of Azure policies and the other one doesn't, and you're an Azure shop, that's going to be a simple choice. So there's probably no one size fits all. But for us, we focus on kind of range of clouds, range of different IAC frameworks, and also trying to build a community around, allowing kind of easy contributions and things like that.
That's great
stuff. Nice question, nice answer. Dave, we're now going to move to Yonut's talk, please. So if you could play the abstract for Yonut's talk, that would be great.
My name is Ionuț Crăciunescu. I'm head of platform engineering at World Wizards, which is a fintech company based in Leamington Spa, UK, that automates financial advice for things like pensions or investments. My topic is about protecting data in S3 using access controls and encryption. Hopefully, by now everyone knows that S3 is the greatest cloud service of all time. As Forrest Braziel, AWS Serverless Hero, described it following 25,000 votes in #CloudMadness Quest run by acloudguru.com. You don't need a computer science to get started with S3, and as AWS's Mike Deck, Serverless Solution Architect, said on Twitter, S3 is a highly durable pay-as-you-go storage that didn't require you to manage any hardware. In short, S3 is just great. Yet, data breaches due to misconfigurations is still a thing, with new entries being added to the list. There are plenty of S3 configuration options available for keeping data safe, from public to private settings, bucket policies to IAM roles and policies, and to KMS integration. Which of all these should be your best practice, and how do you decide what settings to use? In this presentation, we go over things like using S3 VPC endpoints in combination with bucket policies, achieving a private storage layer, using IAM roles in combination with S3 KMS integration and key policies for additional encryption protection, how using wordly maps helped us at World Wizards in the overall S3 configuration decision process and IAM policies versus KMS key policies usage, and also about additional benefits on the back of these configurations, like further integration with AWS config, and testing of access patterns.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Jonat. I'm going to move straight to Steve. I believe you have a question.
I did have a question because I watched your talk and Matt's talk pretty much back to back, and I saw a line I could draw between what you were discussing in terms of securing S3, and then what Matt was discussing in terms of provisioning the provisioning of S3 as code. And are there insecure defaults, or because I talked about defaults are dangerous, are there some obvious insecure defaults that people fall prey to that could be corrected as code, for example? Does that can be then checked by Chekhov? Hey, so what are the pitfalls? That's what I was looking for. I may have missed that.
Absolutely. Some of them is just making S3 buckets public. And recently there is a data leak from an S3 bucket which was public. It was a company doing real estate in Romania, which is my country of origin. And other things is maybe not protecting your IAM roles. And I have a feeling that pretty much everyone knows, I think, was it Capita, if I'm not mistaken, a massive bank in US, which had a data leak. Somebody was able to exfiltrate AWS keys from an EC2 instance and use those keys on his own computer, a different network, and slurp the data from S3. And these would be the most common, I think, that I've seen so far, and can be easily rectified through code. And also in the Amazon console, you can massive tick block all public access for all buckets in your account. So it's an account level setting or bucket level setting.
Yeah, and I think that's where I'm going. It's like no one ever wants. No, that's me. I'm talking about me. I never want to go into the console and like do an imperative action. I would rather totally create that as code so that it becomes like a chaos engineering friendly deployment that I can just maintain that way. And I didn't know if there were missed tick boxes that also translate into potential misfires in terms of generating the code that can be declarative as well. Maybe I just asked Matt a question by accident there.
Yeah, have some thoughts on that if no one else wants to go first.
It's yours.
Cool. Yeah. On that kind of insecure defaults thing, going back to, your talked about kind of Helm charts, but same with Terraform modules. Like we actually did run Chekhov against artifacthub.io and the Terraform registry and downloaded all the modules and kind of for Helm converted that to default K8s manifest and have a look at like, that security versus usability, like what did those defaults look like? And to your point in your talk, Steve, like a lot of them are insecure. On the point of like different policy languages as well, like I guess it doesn't really matter if like your runtime checks are in an AWS specific policy language and Chekhov checks are in Chekhov's policy language. If Chekhov is allowing you, for example, through our VS Code plugin for a developer to find those insecure defaults in a Terraform module and rectify that code before it becomes a commit, then that's just one less runtime like security check in the AWS policy framework that's not going to trigger because you've already remediated that. So it doesn't actually matter, I guess, if the policies are written differently throughout the pipeline. If you're catching things early enough that they then won't trigger further down the pipeline, you're preventing that insecure bucket becoming a bucket in the first place. Maybe that didn't answer the question.
I think it did. Yeah. Are there any other questions? Because I have one more really obvious one.
Just wanted to build on Matt's idea. What we've done internally, we've locked all IAM policies that allow creation of S3 buckets, so they can only be created through code. And for that, it requires a pull request that people will have to review. And we have our own modules that create buckets and enforce various settings, KMS, logging, versioning, and these things, coupled with GuardDuty and another security partner that is scanning our account for these kind of defaults you are referring to, Steve, and see, okay, is it raising a red flag? And if it does, then do we have to address it? Because some buckets, for example, they are intentionally public, but others, they don't have to.
Almost like the S3 version of a Kubernetes like admission controller for enforcing policies.
Cool.
To some extent.
Steve, what was your question? We'll take that before we need to wrap this one up.
He just answered it. Sorry.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
That's perfect. It helps me with my trying to get back on time side of things. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I think there is further conversation happening in the Twitch chat, which it would be good if you could dive into. Thank you all very much indeed for your participation. We will hopefully see you at some point during later in the year for a future Community Summit event. But once again, thank you. And of course, here's another nod to our sponsors. We have PA Consulting, Stack Rocks and Bridge Crew represented here. And you did a brilliant job, Andrew, of positioning Elastic as well, who are another of our sponsors. So entirely unplanned.
Yes.
All right. Cheers, guys. Thank you very much. See you soon.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And moving on, we have our machine learning. I'd love to call it a roundtable, but the world of machine learning has obviously got very busy this week because two of our panelists have had to drop out. We are going to be joined by Phil Basford, whose talk hopefully a number of you have watched. And so, Dave, I'm going to ask you to play the machine learning intro, and then we'll be joined by Phil Basford and I hope Rob Greenwood. Hello, Phil. Hello, Rob. How are you both?
I'm good, thank you. How are you guys?
Yeah, all very well, thank you. Now, I suspect a lot of people already know you, Phil. You know, you played a big role in the previous Community Summit stuff. Rob obviously has been introduced earlier on. However, can you both give a very quick introduction to yourselves before we move into playing your abstract video? Phil, over to you first.
Sure. So I'm Phil Basford. I'm head of solution engineering at a company called Inner Wisdom, and we're a specialist ML partner for AWS. So we do lots of machine learning stuff. And also, I think there's been many of them today, but one is also the APN ambassadors. And I'm also the leader of the Ipswich user group as well, just because I can't do enough of it.
Absolutely. I was going to mention that. Is that new? Have you just started that, or have you just
It's a reboot. So me and some of my mates, we started it 2017. I was somewhere else at the time. I did lots of speaking there about the cool stuff we're doing at the time and kinesis and stuff. And we had about a year and a half worth of meetups then. And then we all did separate things, but we all ended up kind of back at Inner Wisdom and started our Inner Wisdom venture together. So we decided to bring it back to life. So it was a bit weird. We were trying to do it last year, but the pandemic got in the way. So we decided to do it this year, done a virtual one last week. And then we might be doing another one in the summer. And then hopefully, if Boris is right, back to the pub.
Back to the pub. Right, fantastic. Yeah, we're all hoping for that. I'm sorry to have condensed the time here, but as I mentioned, we've not got a couple of the other guys that we're going to be in the machine learning roundtable. I asked Rob and Jamie if they could come in. Neither of them are machine learning experts by any means, but they're going to help out with some of the questions. Dave, can you play Phil's abstract video, please?
Hi everyone, it's Phil from Inner Wisdom again. I'll be giving a talk at the Consum 4 online event this year, and it will be about machine learning and machine learning operations, which is a hot topic right at the moment. So catch me there in talking about how SageMaker helps you achieve this.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Phil. I'm going to move straight to Jamie. You've got a question, I believe, for Phil, yeah?
Yeah, great talk, Phil. It's really interesting, especially as someone who's kind of new to the machine learning and SageMaker ecosystem. So first question really is around auto scaling. So I know you touched on it in your talk, but it was mainly around how would you manage it and how would you configure it? Is it done inside SageMaker, or is it part separate using application auto scaling for controlling the resources when you need to meet demand during busy periods, or when there's like little to no traffic?
Yeah, so there's three ways you can do it. It is basically under the hood. It is application auto scaling that it uses. So you can navigate through the SageMaker console. Once you've deployed your model, send up your endpoint, you can then go through that and then set it all up, and you can give it the min, maximum, and the usual kind of cool down, warm up configuration. So that's perfectly doable. And then if you're kind of more advanced or into your infrastructure as code, you can do it through CloudFormation or any other kind of ACK capability, and that gives you the full application auto scaling thing. The thing to think about particularly is how to scale it. And one thing that SageMaker does kind of expose to you is the number of invocations per instance. So if you're seeing that goes above a certain threshold, you can then start scaling up on that rather than CPU or GPU or any other kind of resource level metric.
Okay, cool. Just kind of following on from that then, have you got any tips around how you might right size your compute resources for training versus inference, whether that be the SageMaker Studio instances or your actual endpoint instances?
It's one of the hardest things to get right, and basically there's a lot of trial and error actually required to get the exact right size here, because it's more complicated in many regards than normal right sizing, because you've got things like the GPU and the GPU's memory to deal with, how much you're feeding data into the training process. You can do that by a big file download from S3. We can pipeline it in. So it's a lot more difficult, and a lot more kind of trial and error is required to get there. What I would say is start small and work up, and start at like the M5 level and the M5 large level, and work up on your production workloads, because they'll give you a good throughput but also predictable in throughput. In more test environments you can use T3s and that kind of thing, and then you go to GPUs if you really need it. Lots of times you can train on GPUs, but you can still do the inference on CPUs, so just be aware that you can do that. The other thing is use spot instance quite a lot. You can,
that's good.
So you can. SageMaker has the inbuilt ability to what's called checkpoint models, so it can save between each iteration of training, so each epoch, a copy of the model. So what that means is you can restart it if it gets terminated. So that's really good for spot instances. So
that's cool.
You can retrain.
All right, that's cool. You mentioned attaching GPUs there. Have you got much experience with elastic inference, so attaching portions of GPUs?
I haven't for elastic inference per se. I've been mostly in the P instances. I've got experience with the kind of the P family at the moment, and been doing stuff in that area. Haven't experimented too much at this point with elastic inference myself.
Okay, cool. I think it's probably worth handing over to Phil again if there are any questions in Twitch, because I don't want to steal anybody else's questions.
No,
I have a couple at the end though, if that's all right.
That's cool. I was just about to ask Rob if he wanted to pick them up. He went and now he's back. Rob, would you like to pick up the questions that are in Twitch? I think there's one from PSMO.
I can do. Just trying to find where they actually are.
I'll do it then if you want.
Yeah, you go for it.
Right, cool. So I'm just going to read it because thinking about ML pipelines cross account. For example, dev in one account to prod in another account. Do you need a dev prod separation for ML ops? Is there a good / recommended way to do that?
That's a really, really great question.
Oh,
really gets to the heart of it. Okay, so generally in ML ops, there's kind of two kind of changes. There's potentially more, but there's two kind of levels of changes that you want to manage. One is incremental kind of changes in your data. So the best kind of models are the ones that learn. And to do that, you'd basically build out a model that can be incrementally retrained. So you're adding just new data to it. So, for example, if you're predicting the delivery address of something, you might want to add more addresses or more copies of documents and stuff to build up your kind of area. But the feature set underneath it stays the same. You're just adding more examples to keep your accuracy up. So that's the first type, and that can be done in a production account, and you want to kind of veer on the side of full automation for that. So you want step function CI/CD, or use that SageMaker pipeline to do all of that for you inside your production account. It wants to be automated, it wants to be hands off, you intervene only if you need to. It's kind of using some of those, going back to those DevOps principles. The second one is you might get new features in your data might change, or you might want to change your model and use a different kind of algorithm. You want to tweak those kinds of sets. So in that situation, treat it more like in traditional kind of development, that it's kind of a feature change. So in that case, what you do want to do is have a pipeline on your dev account that builds that out, trains that against a known data set, and that you can verify the accuracy and how that model is behaving. And then you have a promotion process through into your production account when you're ready, and then upgrade your production account when it's ready. So that's kind of the two main approaches, and that's why you wouldn't have necessarily one or the other. You'd want to do actually both.
Beautiful. A great answer to a great question, I think, there. So I just flagged the plug that someone's put into the chat for Julian Simon's book, Learning Amazon SageMaker. Of course, you had the one fireside chat, I think we called it, didn't we, with Julian Simon back at reInvent. So yeah, it's worth. I think actually I'm going to challenge Joe to find a link for that on YouTube. And put it into the Twitch chat, because I think that was a really nice chat between yourself, Mike Fowler, Gillian McCann, and Julian Simon, who is, I forget his title. What is
Global Evangelist for Machine Learning at AWS. He is the godfather of machine learning evangelism, basically.
Big guns.
There you go. Absolutely. Julian Simon from the CSO at reInvent.
You still can't say his name in the French style, can you?
Of course, Julien Simon. Of course I can. All right, brilliant. Has anybody got any other questions? I'd feel like a right fool, wouldn't I, sat here saying Julien Simon. So who else has got another question for Phil, or are we good? And can we...
I want to know if everybody out there got their hoodies. I'm wearing my reInvent hoodie.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, the one we tried to get you all to get one by doing the game. I'm wearing it today.
Yep. Do you know, I never actually, because I was so busy doing all of this, I got several times partway through into the thing that you had to do, never completed it. So there we go. Right. You clearly did. Rob, I think you got one, didn't you?
I have, yeah. I'm not necessarily sure it was worth all of the effort in the.
It's quite lengthy.
If I'm being entirely honest, but you know.
Yeah. Excellent. So let's wrap this up. Thank you very much, Phil. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Rob. Please stay in Twitch chat if there's any further questions coming up. We're going to move now swiftly onto our serverless roundtable.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, so I'm leaving now.
Okay, and right, we have joining us for the serverless roundtable. From on my screen in front of me here, we've got Jan Sway, we've got Ben Ellerby, we have Angela Timofte, and we have Gareth McCumsky. So,
hi, Phil.
Hello
I can
there,
hear you.
everybody. Welcome.
I can finally hear you.
Right as well. I can hear everybody. Yes, I'm not going to call you Andrew, Gareth. I will call you Gareth. Okay. That was, you know, yeah, quite spectacular. I was determined to call him Gareth, wasn't I? Right. Thank you all very much. Some old friends amongst us here, and then some new faces as well. So I would like you to go around and Jan, start by introducing yourself, please. I can't hear you, Jan. Can anybody else hear Jan?
I can't either, sorry.
No. I tell you what, we'll go to you then, Ben, and then we'll come back to Jan.
Sure. So my name's Ben Ellerby. I'm the VP of Engineering at Theodo. We help other people launch digital products, a lot in serverless. And I'm also an AWS serverless hero, so I get to speak at conferences like this. And I also run the Serverless London meetup with Ant Stanley, yet another AWS hero, and also Alex White, who's also on the call.
Good stuff. Angela, you're up next, please.
Yes, hi. My name is Angela. I work as a data platform manager at Trustpilot. I am also an AWS serverless hero, and I am the coordinator of the AWS community in Copenhagen.
Great, thank you. Gareth?
Yeah, hi folks. My name's Gareth. I am from Serverless Inc. And being a startup, it's a weird thing to have titles because you kind of do a bit of everything. But generally, I tend to work as a solutions architect and developer advocate with the Serverless framework team.
Fantastic. Alex, over to you, please.
Hey, I'm from Theodo, similar to Ben. I'm a cloud architect at Theodo. I help run the Serverless London meetup every month and also write a weekly newsletter where we go over the top 5 serverless articles each week.
Excellent, great. And Jan, are we able to hear you?
You should be able to now. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Cool.
Perfect.
Sorry, there's a big red button here. I accidentally pressed it. Yeah, so my name is Jan. I'm an AWS Serverless hero as well, like Ben and some of the other guys here. I'm also an independent consultant. I help companies adopt serverless, and I also work as a developer advocate for Lumigo as well, which is a pretty kick-ass serverless troubleshooting platform.
Yep. Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so we've obviously got a lot of great talks here that you've done for us. I'm going to go straight in and ask Dave if he can play first Ben's video abstract.
Hi, my name is Ben Ellerby. I'm an AWS serverless hero and VP of Engineering at Theodo. In my talk, Load Testing AWS Serverless Architectures using Serverless, we'll look at how AWS Serverless Architectures, using services like Lambda, API Gateway, Cognito, and DynamoDB, can provide massive scalability if configured in the correct way. We'll look at how serverless tools, such as serverless artillery, can be used to verify scalability, and how architectures can be designed with scalability in mind. To bring this all to life, we'll look at 2 real-life applications that are 100% serverless. We'll look at their architecture to see how it achieves scalability, and we'll look at how serverless artillery was used to verify scalability through serverless load testing. I look forward to seeing you all at the conference and any questions you might have.
Okay, super. Thank you. Well, actually, so it's welcome back to you, isn't it, Ben? Because you did do 2 talks that ended up for our
Yes.
London, the last physical community summit that we actually did in London, however long ago that was. You did 1 talk and then stepped in at about 2 hours notice to do a second talk, I seem to remember. So thank you for coming back and doing this. I think first up for a question for you is Gareth.
Yeah, and first of all, I just want to say it's an interesting topic to talk about load testing with serverless, because a lot of folks, you think about serverless and you think, well, it's just auto scaling. It just handles all the load, doesn't it? Why do you need to load test it? A lot of folks, especially those new into the serverless world, don't realize what those limits that are on all these services could potentially do, especially third-party services. That I've always found has been my Achilles heel, those downstream APIs that just can't handle it. But in your talk, you also mentioned the idea of 2 different ways of doing load testing. The artificial traffic you're sending can either be via the protocol, like you mentioned, just directly stimulating HTTP, or throwing event objects into services with the AWS SDK, or trying to simulate user testing with the browser, so actually simulating somebody being on your site, clicking buttons and so on. I was wondering, though, you mentioned you've used Lambda to do the protocol side of the testing things. And is it not possible to use Lambda to do user simulated testing as well? And what would the differences between the 2 be that might actually make a difference?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in the talk, I'm generally talking about artillery as the tool, and then serverless artillery that lets us run artillery on Lambda functions, which is a really nice way to sort of orchestrate our load testing. There are typically two ways of load testing, protocol-based, so typically hitting the REST APIs for a traditional application, or maybe the GraphQL AppSync APIs for sort of newer applications. But another way of load testing is to simulate real user activity, whether that's sort of a script that you've done in something like Selenium, or whether you've sort of captured real life sort of user data and trying to replicate that. But typically that's being done by running a browser. Now you can run Chrome on a Lambda. I actually do it quite often on projects for things like PDF generation, or sometimes in a sort of visual regression testing pipeline. But that you're going to have a lot more latency. To get sort of one Lambda running one browser is going to be different from one Lambda firing a lot of requests. So when you want to run the sort of scale of load tests that we're doing, so for instance, actually last week for a client, we were running a load test of 250,000 users on a chat application. Actually, I think it might be the chat application Alex talks about in his talk. That sort of scale, getting that many browser instances up, it would become too much, and you'd be sort of constrained by resource. That said, I think real sort of browser testing can give a more realistic sort of footprint of traffic. And I'm really interested by things like CloudWatch synthetics that are enabling us to sort of have a sort of a capture of the sort of traffic that we're getting, and then be able to replay that at scale. I think that we're going to see tools sort of capturing real traffic on production, anonymizing it, and then enabling us to sort of replay it on our infrastructure. I think that will become a lot more normal. But for now, it's just the constraint that getting that many browser instances up is just too expensive to get the scale of traffic that we want.
Is there something that you can do by running like workers on the Lambda function and just have a really big fat Lambdas that can, that's got enough memory to run however many instances of Chrome or headerless Chrome at the same time?
Yeah, definitely. And especially as Lambdas, you can get them a bit bigger these days. I think it's something you could do. With artillery, you definitely wouldn't be able to. It's really a protocol-based sort of way of doing load testing. So you'd have to sort of bring together your own sort of almost framework around orchestrating that YAN. But yeah, you definitely could. I think your quick win is artillery. I think you could do something even better maybe with browser-based testing on Lambda. And the other interesting thing we're starting to do is when we're talking about protocol-based testing, it's not just against APIs. Some of our architectures don't have public-facing APIs. They could be reacting to event bridge events from another part of, let's say, a legacy system. So we're starting now to find ourselves writing custom engines for artillery so that we can just shoot event bridge events in through the AWS SDK rather than rely on an HTTP event through API gateway to then trigger things on event bridge. But yeah, you could definitely do something very interesting with some orchestration of those Lambdas.
Like I think on that, I actually did something in the past for one of my previous companies. We were building a MOBA, multiplayer online battle arena game. So as you can imagine, really a lot of messaging flying all over the place.
Sure.
We actually built it from the ground up using a custom reliable UDP protocol to get the actual performance we needed. And we built a whole application layer that's on top of that custom application protocol as well. So we couldn't use artillery. So we actually end up using Lambda to orchestrate bots playing against each other so that we can simulate what happens to our backend servers. And this is something that we couldn't run the backend actually on Lambda because it's really low. Low latency, ultra low latency, high throughput TCP packets, UDP packets flying around. But we use the Lambda to simulate, say, what happens when like 1 million people playing on our backend, what happens to our backend infrastructure, and where things start to fail over. One of the things that I also did in the past with artillery, with serverless artillery, I find is that you can get the throughput you needed, but it's really hard to get the reporting you want because essentially it's running so many different instances of artillery that you're going to get individual reports for individual Lambda function that's running artillery. It doesn't give you the overall picture you wanted. Say, okay, when I've got 1 million people hitting my website, what's my P95 look like? Well, you don't know because you know the individual P95 reporting for individual Lambda functions running your artillery tests. And have they announced the distributed testing for artillery, the professional version? I thought they have now.
I think they have now. There is a professional
Okay.
version. What we're typically doing is using an observability provider like Datadog or Lumigo or Epsilon or Thundra, and sort of configuring a dashboard in advance of the load test and really using that to gather the metrics. So we're really using artillery to hit the traffic, but then
Right.
we're measuring P99 latency from the observability side. So using something like Lumigo.
Okay, right. So basically, you're kind of just not looking at the end-to-end latency, but just looking at from up to your API gateway, for instance, what's the response latency look like? Because again, it probably doesn't make sense for you in that case to measure the end-to-end when you've got essentially Lambda functions running the same region as your application. So you're not really getting realistic end-to-end latency that, let's say, a customer will see from their laptop on their home, where you got that last mile latency and all of that.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, we have run a couple sort of cross-region load tests, especially we, for instance, had a client making extensive use of Lambda at Edge, but then referencing a DynamoDB database in one region and
Right.
wasn't globally replicating it. So that helped us identify a bottleneck in their architecture, where we actually had requests from Tokyo going all the way to London, which was quite interesting. But yeah. Typically we're looking at not the user to system latency, but the latencies in the system, any errors in the system, and definitely any threatening that's happening.
I remember there was like a company, one of my clients was working with Thousand Eyes. I think they had some really interesting stuff whereby they actually deploy either clients or services or devices around the world, so they can literally test your latency for your application when it's coming from, say, Australia or Japan. And I think the customer found that, oh my God, we didn't realize how bad it is for someone from Japan hitting our EU West 1 server. The latency was like 2 seconds or something silly like that.
Angela,
So
I believe you
Thousand
might-
Eyes is quite interesting. Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right. This is always the problem, really, that I have to be the bad guy that kind of cuts off the conversation to keep the, to make sure that we cover everything. But so I have to try and balance that. Angela, I was just going to come to you to say, I believe you also watched Ben's talk. Is that right? And perhaps you have a question, or am I landing you right in the deep end there?
No, I did watch Ben's talk, and I found it very useful. But no, I don't think I have any questions.
Okay, no problem.
At the moment.
If there's any further questions for Ben, then let's take one more. Otherwise, we will move to, just to tee you up, Dave, we are going to move next to Jan's talk. But any further questions for Ben? No, there's your cutoff point. Dave, can you do the video abstract, please, for Jan's talk?
Hi everyone, my name is Yan Cui. I'm an AWS Serverless hero, independent consultant, and a developer advocate for Lumigo, which has the hands-down best troubleshooting platform for serverless applications. So I've been building and running production workloads on AWS for over 10 years now, and for the last 5 years, I have focused on serverless technologies because they allowed me to do so much more with far less effort compared to the days when I had to manage servers and configure machine images and scaling thresholds and be responsible for the uptime of the underlying infrastructure that runs my code. And I think the example that I'm going to share with you in my talk is a perfect example of that. I will talk about a recent client project where I built a backend for a new social network in just a few weeks while also working part-time. And I was only able to do that because technologies like Lambda, AppSync, and DynamoDB makes for such a powerful and productive stack. And in my talk, we discuss many of the technical decisions we took, such as not using Amplify CLI and not using single table designs with DynamoDB, and how I manage the entire AWS organization using infrastructure as code, and what the monthly cost for such a system looks like. Anyway, hope to see you there.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you, Jan. I'm going to go to now, Ben, I think that you have a question for Jan. That's right.
Yeah, first of all, Ian, really enjoyed the talk. I think it's really nice to see sort of how fast we can build things with serverless. It's always nice and inspirational. One question I had, and obviously it was sort of, how to do this in such a short period of time, but did that project get to some of these interesting sort of challenges for AppSync when it comes to sort of supporting multi-regional architectures?
Yeah, great question. We didn't have to because the app is only live right now. I guess mostly used by people in Belgium, and the next step for the clients to expand it to, I think, Germany and the Netherlands. So I think from very early on is kind of focused around Europe because the client has got a lot of connections with Erasmus, the European, I guess, student exchange program.
Mm-hmm.
So we were quite happy to be able to run everything out of one single region. But if I were to expand that, I guess if we use something like Thousand Eyes and realize, hey, someone using it from the US is having really bad experience, then we might have to look at how do we do that. I guess from the top of my head, you might end up doing something very similar to what you do with API Gateway. You have a Route 53 in front of your custom domain. I guess the main downside in that case is that some of the AppSync features is not going to work, like subscriptions. The normal queries and GraphQL operations would be fine. It's just different endpoint that gets routed to. But things like subscriptions, that's where everything kind of falls down a little bit.
And then when that user happens to go on holiday to the US for some reason, and then they don't exist in that part of the world, it gets interesting too. Would you replicate the data, do you think, between regions? And what would be your strategy for that?
Yeah, so if I'm going to go multi-region, I'm definitely going to go multi-region active, unless there's some specific reason that you can't get the data out of the country, in which case one of my clients had that. So they had to do a whole layer of abstraction in terms of data access to figure out first, where is the data for this particular customer, because they're dealing with, I guess, medical data. So you can't leave the country. So as part of that, the application code, they have to figure out, okay, given this customer or this user, which region should his data be hosted in, and then have to go essentially that round trip from Europe, because that's where the customer is right now, to US where the custom data is hosted. So that's just going to be a whole layer of complexity that's involved. For them, it's necessary because dealing with the sensitive data that can't leave the country. But for us, it's okay. We don't have to. Well, for this customer, at least, we don't have to worry about that, which is good for me.
Yeah, the medical data makes these things so challenging. I think we'll see a lot more sort of maybe SaaS companies taking on that challenge of keeping data local to the region and doing the routing piece, because it can take up a massive amount of development resource.
Yeah, you can. I guess there's only maybe it really depends on your application and how much they can actually do for you, because they are probably not aware of the contextual information about your particular customer and where his data should be hosted. In fact, it's actually I'm working with some other clients who are in the medical as well as in the legal space, where this law applies, where your data can't leave outside of US, for example, because it's a US customers. And so when they're looking at SaaS products, one of the things they actually say is, well, it's great, you do multi-region by default. We don't want that. We can't have that because we can't have our customer data going out of the US. So that's actually quite interesting once you get into that particular space where those kind of laws kick in.
Yeah, and to add on that one, actually, now with GDPR, you kind of need to take care of where your data is stored all the time and how you move it around. So that's another aspect when it comes to how you put your data. So.
Yeah, like US right now, there's also more and more of the states are catching up. Like California has been like very well known for having pretty strict data. Similar to GDPR requirements, and every time you deal with California, it's okay, God, that's another whole other layer of the complexity I got to deal with.
Yeah, exactly. And something that people don't think about is, especially I remember when GDPR started in Europe, companies were like, oh, we don't have customers from Europe, or we'll stop Europe. But it's not really like that. It's like, no, if you want anything to work, actually, you kind of need to apply those rules. So yeah, it's bringing definitely more challenges to engineers, I would say, all these laws. So, yeah.
Yeah, and the whole right to be forgotten, all of that.
Oh, yes. Actually, I had another question for you, Jan. I watched your presentation and was very informational. You mentioned actually that you were working part-time and there were other people on this project, and of course it took less than 4 weeks, I think you mentioned. But how much experience everyone had? Because I think when it comes to serverless, sometimes people expect things to be developed like super quickly. And yeah, I would want to hear more about this subject from you.
Yeah, so I was literally I was the backend team. I was working on my own, and I was working, I think about 3 days, maybe 3 days a week. But obviously, I've got lots of experience with AWS and the service technology, so I don't have to go through the learning curve. Yeah, I think a lot of teams, when they first start working with serverless, it takes like maybe a month, maybe more, just to get accustomed to the way of doing things and not running everything locally, and just trying to unlearn everything you've learned in the last 10 years. In one of my previous jobs, I was working in a team of 6 backend engineers. I was the only one with prior AWS experience. And I reckon like the first month for everybody who joined the team was just hell on earth. We just like everything, just learning at the same time. What's CloudFormation? What's IAM? What's DB? Lambda? Like I remember one girl I was working with, one of my best friends now. She, her first day is, what's this Lambda rubbish? Give me a container. I'll run this the Express app for you. I mean, fair to her, she got it up, running pretty quickly. And nowadays, she's one of the biggest advocates for serverless I know, because you just you don't have to do any of that anymore. But yeah, it took her and everybody else I worked with in that team a good month and a half maybe to get to the point where they can just do everything themselves. They can be productive. But there is definitely a learning curve. I would say probably not as much as if you're coming fresh into AWS and you're learning like containers and the AWS networking. Networking alone is takes a degree to master on AWS. I think with Lambda, if you don't have to deal with VPCs and all of that, then you can get to where you need to be productive a lot quicker.
We find on a lot of our training projects at CI, it's about 6 to 8 weeks to get a team up to speed on it. I think actually, Alex, you're middle of training a group of developers, right?
Yeah, part of my talk is actually about training 2 internal developers that previously worked on .NET to work with AppSync and serverless in general. We found that structure really helps. So we usually start by building out a skills matrix, getting them to fill out the parts that they're already familiar with and the parts that they're starting completely from scratch on, and then pairing on tickets, picking tickets that focus on their weak points, and that does help speed it up. And occasionally you find someone where it just clicks and everything makes sense to them, and this is their perfect way of working. But particularly experienced devs, that doesn't happen too often. And it does take that sort of 6 to 8 weeks of like relearning how things are supposed to work, or forgetting the old ways and learning the new ways. Particularly DynamoDB is where we've struggled the most. It's like, forget what you know, we'll start from basics. Yeah, that's the main challenge.
I think that's you cover that on your talk, do you, Angela?
Yeah, that's why I was smiling when I heard that.
Yeah.
I'm like, yes, I know. That's why I constantly talk about this subject, because it's definitely something I see people struggling with. So yeah.
And it's at Serverless Framework, we're working with folks all the time who are trying to get into serverless for the first time and have a bazillion questions to ask. And education is really, I think, the biggest stumbling block that serverless in general has, because it's just so different, a lot of the concepts, to what you're usually used to. And a lot of the best practices are so antithetical to what was best practice in a traditional way of building things. It just takes a lot of time and effort, a lot of time.
Yeah. Good. Actually, I think we should move now to Gareth's talk. I don't want to move off Jan's questions too soon if someone else has got a question for Jan, but if not, that's a no. Then we'll move straight on to Gareth's video abstract, please, Dave.
It's been over 5 years now since the serverless framework was released, and since serverless as a development paradigm broke onto the scene. And in a number of ways, it's still as enigmatic and mysterious as it was back then. And one of those mystery topics around serverless is, how do you do local development with serverless? Hi there, my name is Gareth McCumsky, and I have been a serverless developer since 2016. And I find myself now working with the team at Serverless Inc., helping other companies and teams build their serverless solutions. I've heard so many people and teams on Slack, over Zoom calls, on forums, and Stack Overflow discuss the various techniques they use to try and do serverless locally, as if it's some kind of organic product that you can get from your local farmer's market. This talk is going to take a look at all the various options I've seen over the years and tried myself. We will look at some advantages and disadvantages of the various options, consider the development workflow, and even look at sticky topics like IAM. What about automated testing in CI/CD? And for that matter, what would a general serverless software development lifecycle look like? We will then finish up with what we have found at Serverless to be possibly the best way for teams to develop their serverless applications locally. And before I go, we may even have a little peek at something new and interesting we're working on at Serverless that can help developers build their serverless applications.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Gareth. We've all just been saying how impressive the production quality is. I know that someone's going to ask you a question about that shortly, but we're going to go to Angela first. Angela, your question, please.
Yes, so actually I found your presentation, Gareth, super interesting. It's actually one of the questions I get to my presentation is like, how do you do local development? And I'm always like, I don't do it locally. So my question to you is like, when do you see the need for doing local development from your experience?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. That's one of the biggest reasons why I created this talk, to try and shine a bit of light onto it. And even Jan mentioned it briefly in his talk as well, about trying to find ways to emulate stuff locally. So without rehashing the entire talk necessarily, it's difficult because in general, I find local development isn't even really necessary. The biggest issues that come up with it is that when you're building an application that's running entirely in the cloud, there is no concept of a machine, especially in serverless, that's running anything for you. So, you know, in the good old days, you could take that EC2 instance and kind of rebuild that on your local machine. And now you're kind of close to what production really looks like. And local development becomes more accurate. And that's the real issue, is the accuracy of your local implementation. So I can use tools like LocalStack and SLS offline and a bunch of other things to try and emulate all this stuff locally. The problem is that no matter how much effort I put in, it's never going to be as close to the cloud as it needs to be for you to have a really good sense of, oh, this works on my machine. I mean, we've heard that before. It worked on my machine, and it goes into production and everything blows up. And so that's one of the problems is there's no way, there's some certain fundamental issues that you cannot replicate. So the basic ones are latencies. AWS doesn't mention it, but there are latencies between their services. Their services speak over networks, whereas emulation on your local machine is CPU cycles away, which is much, much faster. So that's not going to be an accurate representation. There's issues with IAM policies. Those bite people all the time when you're trying to deploy restricted IAM policies for good security measure like you're supposed to, and then things just break because IAM denies your request or whatever it might be. And a number of others, the limits that you have in AWS. And I speak from experience, having used a lot of these tools, where I have, for example, written a Lambda function that generates literally 1 million SQS queries in my local environment, which I don't see because everything runs so quickly and flawlessly locally. It doesn't seem to have any issues. And as soon as I push it into production because the dev environment doesn't test it, you suddenly see things fall over in production because the one Lambda function generates 1 million messages. So in general, I would say never. But if you do have very specific computational requirements, then maybe you can get away with some local testing. But in general, the tooling as well is getting so much better, just developing directly into the cloud. And I'd advise anybody who's interested in that and hasn't seen the talk to go take a look. It goes through all of the various options available to you for local testing, talks about their good sides and their bad sides, and then comes to this conclusion that I'm basically talking about right now.
Yeah, I find the only time when I need a local simulation is when I want to do server-side rendering. Like everything else, I can just run Lambda locally and look at the JSON, but I can't compile HTML and the CSS in my head. So I need to have something local that I can hit. But that's like the only time when I do feel, oh God, it'd be really good to have a local server I can run to hit the endpoint. I guess that's where things like local stack, which you talk about in your talk, comes in, and the serverless offline as well, which I find quite useful for those specific scenarios.
We've done some weird stuff with Webpack and S3, by the way, Jan, which we should talk about at some point. But we have had bundling into S3 at one point.
So what, bundle it and then put it
bundling
S3
and syncing to S3 as you go.
Yeah. Okay, that's clever.
It was fun. I wouldn't recommend it always.
You mentioned local stack, even in your own talk. I remember hearing you say, Ian, that the problem with local stack, especially in the past, I haven't used it super recently, but I know in the past it was kind of brittle and difficult to configure. And sometimes the services would respond as you would expect them. Sometimes they didn't. And then you don't know if that's because your code is wrong or what you've built is wrong, or it's local stack being weird again, or serverless offline again. Some of the issues there ends up being things like if you want to test anything but HTTP, then serverless offline kind of doesn't solve your problem anymore. So there's all of these issues, unfortunately, with trying to do things locally with serverless.
Yeah, I've had so many teams that spend like weeks just trying to get things working properly on local stack, and other teams just spend 2 hours, get it deployed to AWS, and never think about it again.
Yeah, and that's kind of the point. A lot of folks move to serverless because they want it to be fast. They want to get up and running. They want to put stuff into the cloud. They want to get stuff into production. They want to build features, and then they spend 3 weeks trying to get a local environment running, which still ends up not being as good as it should be.
Cool. Ben, you got a question for Gareth, I think.
Yeah, my completely less related to your talk question is, how did you record your talk? I'm very sorry, it's a motorbike going past. Your production quality, Gareth. Do you have a studio in your house?
I actually wish that was the case. This is a combination of a standing desk so that I can raise with a mini tripod and an old Samsung phone, and doing it at midnight when all the kids are asleep so that the audio recording isn't absolute trash. Speaking of which, if anybody notices, the audio isn't great, but that's because I recorded it 3 times and the microphone wouldn't work with me. So you got what you got. A bit of post-editing to try and sort that out. I look at it though and I see just ways to make it better. I'm kind of frustrated that it wasn't as good as I wanted, but yeah, thanks for that.
You made us all very self-conscious about ours, Gareth.
Not the intention at all.
I think you did a very good job. Everybody's agreed on that. Right. We are under time pressures, unfortunately, but so that means that I'm going to move on to ask Dave to play Alex White's video abstract, please.
Hi, my name is Alex White, and I'm a serverless developer at Theodo. Theodo is a company that helps other companies build and deliver digital products, whether that's a brand new startup working on an MVP, or a more established company undergoing digital transformation. In my talk, we're going to look at how you can build highly scalable, real-time applications through the use of AWS AppSync. Users have come to expect real-time features when using their applications. However, building them from scratch, while remaining highly scalable, comes with many key challenges. Thankfully, AWS AppSync manages a lot of that complexity for us, while being 100% serverless. AppSync is a GraphQL as a service offering that builds scalable and resilient GraphQL APIs. We can then use this to easily build scalable real-time applications through the use of mutations and subscriptions. Now, if you don't know what mutations and subscriptions are, or GraphQL in general, don't worry, we'll cover that in my talk. We'll start with the basics. What is AppSync? How do you use it? And how can you save time and code with VTL? And to really show the power of AWS AppSync, we're going to look at a real-world case study where a team of 4 engineers were able to add real-time chat to an application that supports hundreds of thousands of concurrent users in a little under a month. I look forward to seeing you all at the conference and answering any questions you may have.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you very much, Alex. And I'm going to go to Ben. I believe you have a question, Ben, for Alex.
Yeah, well, it's a bit unfair. So me and Alex work in the same company, so I was eavesdropping on their project. But it's a question I think gets raised quite a lot, and Jan covers really well in his talk as well. But with AppSync, it's like a massive sort of speed up for the team. You can do things at quite high scale. But permissions management, I think, for the role-based access control for users trying to manage, who gets access to which data from your DynamoDB via AppSync. What was your strategy on that, Alex?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's one of the things I quite like about AppSync is that it has this sort of access control security stuff built straight in. On this project, we just used Cognito and Cognito groups, which it's quite simple to add to your schema, which like mutation or query can be done by which type of group. So in our system, for example, it's a simple chat app, which has like moderators and attendees. And so moderators have particular mutations they can do, such as deleting messages that attendees shouldn't be able to. And so with this, it's like less than a line to add some very simple access control. It's like really powerful. If you need to do more complicated things, which thankfully we didn't have to on this app, you can do stuff like with pipeline resolvers, putting lambdas in front of your mutations. But yeah, luckily we were able to just lean very heavily on the Cognito features that come out of the box. The only other thing that was quite powerful was you can have different like types that are returned from different mutations. So say a user wants to get information about their user, they can have like the full type, where if I wanted to find information out about you, Ben, and there was like a get user that you passed an ID to, that could return a public type, for example, that has a very cut down set of fields. I think, and you actually talk about the exact same scenario in your talk, so it seems like it's quite common. But having those different types is really powerful.
Yeah, actually, I've got a question for you about the pipeline resolvers, because one of the things that I find is that it's great that you've got this pipeline resolver that can let you do additional validation and whatnot. But in practice, it's actually a bit of a pain because you've got a AppSync API that's got 100 resolvers. Now you've got to rewrite essentially all of them to turn them into a pipeline resolver. And I mean, I had to do something like whereby I wrote a serverless framework plugin to essentially rewrite all of that, every single resolver to inject a new pipeline resolver in there, just so that I don't have to do it by hand. Have you guys found like a different way to do that? No, that's maybe less complex.
Thankfully, we didn't use too many pipeline resolvers in this app, so I think there's actually only 2 cases where we use them. And for like very simple use cases, because like time to market was a very important part of this project. When we got to something complicated enough that you would use a pipeline resolver for it, we usually just went to a Lambda. And in the future, we might go back and rewrite those pipeline resolvers so we don't have to handle those cold starts or other limitations that Lambda brings into the system. But because Lambdas was good enough, and speed to market was the main priority here, as well as training. Like it's simpler to teach how to write a Lambda than it is to explain how the pipeline resolvers all work together. We usually found ourselves leaning on that.
I think now that they've got the IFC open for using JavaScript or I guess Node.js as the templating language, hopefully that will make some of that a bit easier. You don't have to shove Lambda in there and have the cold starts just because you want to run some additional validation that you don't know how to write in the VTL. But yeah, the whole pipeline resolver mechanism, I think they're still missing some easier way to do this kind of like a middleware type of thing where you want something to be done on every single resolver but then that forces you to having to do something to turn every single resolver into a pipeline resolver, and that's just a lot of labor.
Yeah, I'm quite excited for an alternative to VTL to come out, because it was just another thing that we needed to train people how to use. And it's really powerful. It gets you a lot of the way there for most, particularly if you're just doing CRUD operations. Like you can basically copy and paste the templates AWS give you and change a couple of lines. But yeah, it's just another thing people needed to learn. We found like unit testing them got people up to speed quicker. Although they're quite simple and probably don't need too many unit tests in the real world as like a way of speeding up development. We found TDD quite useful.
It's almost local development, right, Alex? You've kind of made a local development environment with your unit tests.
Yeah, exclusively for the VTL. Everything else we do follow more end-to-end and integration tests, but as like a training tool of writing the test first and getting that quick feedback loop, but we found it very useful.
Yeah, so you're using those same libraries from the Amplify, I guess, auxiliary packages that they publish. I had loads of problem with those packages that sometimes they just don't behave right.
There's
Like
some weird dependency management going on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. There's some weird bugs as well. There was a case, one of the examples in my talk actually is like we wanted to test that an error was being thrown correctly. And I don't know if this has been fixed in a newer version of the package, but there's a helper function that's like empty or null, I think it is. And it was throwing true or false the wrong way around. So when it wasn't empty, it was coming back that it was, and vice versa. So we had to like patch that locally, and we should probably open up a pull request on that. But yeah, there were some weird bugs that we've lost a bit of time to over the course of the project.
Yeah, I think they fixed some of that. I had some errors, like weird errors from when I throw using the helper object to throw the custom errors. I had some weird things happening there as well, where it doesn't throw the error I wanted. It just throws some other error that this code is not handling. I think they fixed that particular bug I had.
Right. I need to interrupt once again. I need to ask Dave to introduce or to play the abstract for Angela's talk.
Hello there, my name is Angela Timofte and I work as a data platform manager at Trustpilot. And at reInvent, I presented about Amazon DynamoDB and share some untold stories of working with serverless databases. In general, when you go to conferences, or actually nowadays, when you watch conferences, you hear all about the successful stories and how great it is to work with it. But let's all be real, we all make mistakes. And that's why I like to share some of the mistakes that I've made so that others can learn from them. Misconceptions that people have when working with DynamoDB, which we can address so that everyone can share their successful stories of working with DynamoDB. It always makes me super happy to talk about DynamoDB, share tips and tricks, talk about how to model your data, configurations, and so on. And if you want to hear me talk more about this subject, on 4th of March, I will join AWS CSO community where I'll answer more questions about this. But before that, make sure you go and watch my reInvent talk. See ya and bye-bye.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Angela. And of course, this was a talk that you delivered first for reInvent this year. And so thanks for doing it, coming back here to answer some questions around all of this. I'm going to go to Jan first for the first question, please, Jan.
Yeah, so I guess in the DynamoDB community, there's a lot of debates around single table design or not. It sounds like a Trustpilot from your talk. You mentioned you guys have got over 100 different tables, but you also touched on single table designs and how you would do it. So have you guys considered both approach and which side of the coin did you land on?
Yes, yeah, it's a constant debate, I would say, between like single table design and like going with multiple tables. And I don't think we have a rule at Trustpilot, I would say. It depends a lot on the team because different teams have different types of experience with DynamoDB. To be honest, that's why I'm kind of going and presenting everywhere about the single design way of working with data. Yeah, I would say it would depend on the teams. I try to push more on the single design table. Because I see the benefits of doing so. But at the same time, I see some downsides when it comes to people understanding what's happening in there. And might be a bit more difficult to explain to teams that don't have as much experience. And I actually had this situation where, like, I designed with my team a table which I was very proud about, and then we kind of had to give that context to a different team, and they took it over and they were like, oh, we'll put everything into Aurora. And I was like, no, why? But it was because the access patterns were a bit more complex, and they couldn't really see them. So yeah, I would say it depends on what you're doing. And like, I definitely learned from that sometimes you also need to see how you might want to split, even though you could put everything in one table. Maybe that will make it much easier if you split the data a bit more.
And I think looking at the idea between multiple and single table, though, because the way DynamoDB builds you when you access, it kind of doesn't matter in that way, as long as you're able to get the data you need. If you do everything in a single table, it's going to build you just as much as if you split that out into 10 different tables and access those separately. Each query is potentially going to, and I see Jan queuing up to debate me on that issue there.
Yeah, so the difference is that when you do a query, you can actually fetch, say, 4 items depending on size. Query charges you based on size, so you can get the 4K of data even if it's 10 rows. So if you can essentially pay for 1 read unit and get 10 items versus 10 different get items from different tables, which would be 10 units, 10 read units. I guess the difference there is just are you doing enough traffic to actually mean anything? I mean, if you're not doing enough and your DynamoDB bill at the end of the day is like $5 a month, then it doesn't matter how much you optimize, so you're not going to save yourself anything meaningful more than a cup of coffee.
Cool. Gareth, did you have another question for Angela?
Yeah, I mean, you even briefly touched on it, Angela, because I've heard from a lot of folks who are interested in DynamoDB, and you say to them, well, you try to explain to them the way to think about these things, like you mentioned in your talk, is that you have to front load how you design your table, because with relational databases, you can kind of go, oh, these are my entities. Let's build a relational database. Now let's go build our app. Whereas with DynamoDB, it's the absolute reverse. You've got to say, okay, this is our app, and this is how we're going to access things. Now let's go design our database for this. And a lot of the time I hear folks talking about things like, well, I don't know what my access patterns are yet. How would you answer those people who are adamant they have no idea what their access patterns will be?
Well, first of all, it will be like, what are you building where you don't know what you're going to do, right? So it's like, you kind of need to know. But yeah, that's like definitely an issue especially with people that have a lot of experience with relational databases. They will come to DynamoDB and they will be like, oh, but I can't do any joins. And you're like, well, of course, it's a NoSQL. But yeah, I actually saw that quite a bit. But yeah, with DynamoDB, like you need to define those access patterns, and at the same time, if you're adding more things, you shouldn't be afraid of like changing around your data and like pushing more access patterns and changing the way you get your data. Like I had on the example I'm showing in my presentation, we actually had to add more data, so like more access patterns on how we get the data. And it's very easy because you also keep the partition key and the sort key naming generic, so then you can add more to that, and you're not limited to what you decided in the beginning. And of course, like nowadays you can move data around quite easily with the tools that we have. So like just create another table or anything like that if you discover other access patterns that you need to have on your data.
Wonderful. Now, I am terribly sorry. I know this conversation could carry on and I've kept having to pull it in, but we have to move to the next section, the final section of today. Thank you all so much for your talks and for coming today to do the Q&A. I'm going to say goodbye for now, and then hopefully we'll see you later this year at some other Community Summit event. So Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks so much, Phil.
Cheers, folks. Thanks, Phil.
Okay, good. So into the final section, I am delighted to welcome back to the AWS Community Summit, Mr. Ricardo Suarez, who is our phenomenal, incomparable mastermind quiz master. I'm not going to babble anymore. I'm going to hand over to Ricardo Suarez. Over to you.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? Am I live?
You are live. You are live.
Okay, well, welcome everyone to, I guess, this special mastermind challenge. It's the kind of the pub quiz version because we have not got the lighting and the mood setting. But really, it's just a bit of fun to test your knowledge, both general tech knowledge as well as AWS knowledge. Slightly different format. I'm gonna there's 2 rounds still of questions. First, general tech ignorance and AWS tech knowledge. But this time I'm going to tell you the question. I'm going to wait a few seconds and then I'm going to give you the answer. So really this is kind of a play at home, rely on your honesty, and then share how well you did at the end of it. So get your pen and paper ready. And without further ado,
Ricardo, we're just going to play the little video.
Oh, okay, cool.
Introduce Mastermind. We mustn't skip this little bit.
No, indeed.
And yes, before I let you dive into your questions, then so everybody who takes part today will receive a $25, I almost said $25,000 thing there, $25 of AWS credits. You need to DM in Slack, Joe Park. We'll figure this one out. And that's how we'll get the credits to you. Ricardo, over to you.
Okay, great. So I hope you've got those that pen and paper ready and you're ready to kind of answer some of these questions. So without further ado, question number 1. What is the name of the publisher that famously uses animal prints and pictures on their front cover? So I'll give you a few seconds there to think about that question. Okay, enough time. These are the easy ones, right? So the answer is O'Reilly. So give yourself a pat on the back and a point if you got that one right. Okay, question 2. Red Hat's logos is the same kind of hat that's worn by Shadowman, but what kind of hat is it? So if you like to wear a hat from time to time, if you're a chapeau wearer, then you should know this one. Okay, so the answer is fedora. So give yourself another pat on the back and a point as well if you got that one right. Moving logically on to question 3, we have Netflix open sourced a tool that helps you test your applications to see how they tolerate unexpected failures. But what is that tool called? Getting slightly harder now, but still not beyond the realms of possibility. Okay, so the answer is Chaos Monkey. Okay, so give yourself another point if you manage to scribble that down and you can make sense of it. Question 4. Can you name either of the companies from the HBO series Silicon Valley? So if you haven't seen it, then I recommend you grab it wherever you can. It's a very, very funny series. I think it's 6 series so far. So give yourself a point if you wrote down Hooli or Pied Piper. I've not seen actually series 6, so if there's a new company that's been put in there that I don't know about, then you can put yourself a point as well if I've missed that one out. Okay, so question 5. In what year did the iPhone 1 launch? So what year did the iPhone 1 launch? Very pivotal year in technology. And the answer is 2007. So again, well done if you got that one right, and give yourself another point. So if you've got 5 points so far, you're doing well. You're looking strong. Okay, question 6. We've got a bit of a special one here. So as you can see from the picture, a few weeks ago, this webcam filter, which hopefully is coming through to you on the Twitch, hit the headlines around the world. But what was the catchphrase that made it famous? Okay, so what was the catchphrase that made this webcam filter famous? And I'm sure most of you would have seen this. I hope it was pretty much of a viral sensation. Okay, let's get this cat off. So the answer is, I am not a cat. Okay, so give yourself a point and a lick of the whiskers if you got that one right. I say, okay, so question 7. The iconic games company that dominated the 1980s was founded in Aspie de la Zouch and created best-selling games such as Jetpack, Night Law, and Saberwolf on the ZX Spectrum. What were they called? And I'll give you a point if you know the company name or what they then ended up becoming when they went to work for Nintendo or then Microsoft. Okay, and obviously ZX Spectrum has been a bit of a strong theme today, so that was a complete coincidence. Okay, so the answer to that one is Ultimate Play the Game or Rare. So if you've got either of those, I'll give you a point. I'm feeling generous today. I'm not normally like that. Okay, so question 8. How many layers and levels does the OSI model have? How many layers or levels does the OSI model have? Whether it's more or less than Dante's Inferno, I can't comment, but it has a number of layers. What number are they? And anyone who's done tech back in the day, hopefully this has been ingrained in your memory. So the answer here is 7, and I'm not going to ask you what they are, but I'm sure you all know what they are. Okay, question 9 is, what type of DNS record translates an IP address to a host name? What type of DNS record translates an IP address to a host name? In fact, actually, I think it's the other way. Actually, it's actually what type of record translates a host name to an IP address? And the answer is a record. So if you got that one right, despite my getting those wrong, well done. Give yourself another point. And the final question for this round is, what does ARM stand for? Anyone who's got a Raspberry Pi or who's been loving and using AWS Graviton instance types will know what the technology underneath that is ARM, but what does it stand for? And the answer is Advanced Risk Machines. So that's the end of the first round. A maximum score of 10 points. So if you found yourself with 11 points, then something's gone wrong. But I won't ask any questions. But let's go straight into the second round. Okay. And I'm hoping that you've got some stuff going in the Slack to make sure that they're okay. Nothing coming up in the Slack at the moment. Right. Okay, cool. So second round, more AWS focused questions here. Starting off with easy ones, getting gently harder. So question 1, who is the CTO of AWS? Who is the Chief Technology Officer of Amazon and AWS? Hopefully this is an easy one. Very famous for wearing some really cool t-shirts when he speaks. And the answer is Werner Vogels. Question 2, what is the name of the AWS service that helps you configure your networking constructs in the cloud? Okay, what is the name of that service you use when you're working day in, day out with networking on AWS? And the answer is Virtual Private Cloud, VPC. So either of those do. So give yourself another point if you got that one right. Question 3, JPL NASA, or NASA JPL rather, and the Perseverance Mars rover were helped by which AWS service in the design of the rover arms and tools? Slightly more difficult, tricky one here. So what AWS service did they use when designing and testing the robotic arms? And the answer there is AWS RoboMaker. So give yourself a point and a huge hurrah if you got that one right. It's a great service. I've been spending a lot of time with that in the last week or so. Okay, question 4. What new service announced during reInvent has the name that originates from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? So hopefully there's a few fans out there who will know this one. And the answer here is Babelfish. So give yourself a question and a towel, and people who know Hitchhiker's Guide will know what I mean there, if you got that one question right. So question 5, what AWS processor name is used in instance types that might give you 40% better price performance, but also allows you to have much more efficient, lower powered workloads? It's a bit of a clue, I think, that I mentioned earlier. So what is the name of that the instance type and processor? So give yourself 1 point if you said AWS Graviton 2 or any of the instance types that Graviton 2 uses. So question 6, AWS CEO Andy Jassy is a keen sports fan, and he also is a part owner of which Seattle team? So anyone who is a keen sports fan might know this question, or if you generally know your Andy Jassy trivia, then you might know this. Okay, so the answer is the Seattle Kraken, which is an ice hockey national NHL hockey team. So question 7, what are the 2 programming languages supported on Lambda at Edge? So any serverless folks out there, hopefully you'll get this one, otherwise you're going straight to detention. So the answer is Python and Node. So give yourself 1 point if you got both of them, give yourself half a point if you got one of them. Okay, last 3 questions now. Question 8. Which AWS service is an open source IoT runtime service that was recently relaunched as V2 at reInvent? Which AWS service is an open source IoT runtime service that was launched at a reInvent as V2? Okay, and the answer to that is Greengrass V2, AWS Greengrass V2, which is now open source. Question 9. During reInvent, a number of observability launches were announced. Can you tell me any one of them? So this is 1 point for any of the 3 observability launches that we mentioned during reInvent. Okay, so give yourself a point if you got either Open Distro for OpenTelemetry, the Amazon Managed Service for Prometheus, or Amazon Managed Service for Grafana. Give yourself 1 point. I'm not going to let you have 3 points if you got all of them, although I might give you an extra half point if you did. And the final question for this fun mastermind pub quiz is, what is the name of the Amazon SageMaker open source project and service that helps you detect bias and unfairness when working with machine learning? Okay, so one of the sessions earlier on, they were talking about SageMaker. Phil, I hope you get this one right. I'm sure you will. So the answer here is SageMaker Clarify. So 2 sets of 10 questions, maximum score of 20, actually maybe and a half. So how well did you do? If you got over 14, well done. You did really, really well. And in fact, I want to hear from you the next time we run the Mastermind ComSum event, because you could be a contender to take the crown from previous champions such as Yang and Phil. If you got any less than 5, then I'm afraid you're going to have to stay back for detention. So with that, Phil, I'm going to hand it back to you to wrap up, and I hope you enjoyed that.
Stay on screen for a little while, will you, Ricardo?
I will.
Because what I'd like people to do is just to ping into the Twitch chat their scores that they got. So let's see who is.
I will change the cat persona to be
please.
Judgy.
Yes, please. Do you know that suits you?
I think it does.
Oh, it goes a bit strange when you turn to the side.
It does, doesn't it? It's a bit two-dimensional.
That's freaking me out quite a lot, actually. Awesome. Thank you very much, Ricardo. So we've got a 9 in there. I think that's pretty
respectful. 9 is respectful. That's not too bad. 7.5 could do better.
Yeah, could do better.
You're not quite into detention. So
another 9, an 8, a 7.
Okay.
10. Get that. 10.
Wow. So we have a winner so far.
Yeah, I mean, no one's
5.
No one's beating my 19.5 yet, are they? As if I did actually start pretty well, but then I got distracted.
You did.
There's my
I think I knew that you'd get the O'Reilly one right, but then
right. We may have rehearsed that one, but I knew it.
We might have done.
Right, Ricardo, thank you very much. We're going to be back with Mastermind at our next, with the proper Mastermind at our next one in April. I know you've got to shoot off. Awesome. Always good to see you, Ricardo. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, that's it, everybody. Look how fantastically we are on time. 3 things from me. I wanted to just give a shout out and a big thank you to our wonderful sponsors who are here all year: Steamhouse, Stack Rocks, Bridge Crew, Infinity Works, PA Consulting, and Elastic. You're all amazing. Thank you very much for your support. We'll put the competitions, the details for those, well, they're already in Slack, but we'll probably stick them in again. We are back in April, would you believe? Lunacy, isn't it? But it's mid-April. We've been invited to do one of our things as part of something called the Digital City Festival. We'll be in touch with you all about that. It's going to be, I think, bigger and broader than ever before. And there is also going to come your way a survey about what you thought of this and trying to find out a bit more about what you would like to see in the future. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Joe Park. Thank you, Mr. Dave Burke, for everything you do. It's awesome. And thank you all for joining us. See you next time.